Chapter 530. Do you really think that the stewards of Wei world are just decorations? I use them because I want them to replace your positions one day. Hellion Vivian slowly raised her eyes. Her eyes were like the stars in the sky, dazzling. It is said that the stewards of the family cannot be dismissed. After all, it is not easy to find people who are familiar with the industry. Steward son, do you think that the stewards who can manage profound heavens, who can open shops and collect materials from all over the place, are inferior to petty people like you who only know how to talk big? Replace our positions. Replace our positions. Ha 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 ha. We have lost, we have lost. After steward's son laughed, he kept repeating the words "we have lost." When the other 5 stewards saw him like this, they also looked like they had lost their souls. Their eyes were half closed, and their hair was messy. There was no longer the imposing appearance they had when they first arrived. From the Empress to the stewards, they fought steadily and steadily, step by step. Many people thought that she opened Wei world for money. But in fact, she was thinking about who would replace them in the future. She had really played a big game of chess. Such a game of chess, even if it was a talented minister in an important position, he might not be able to win. And she, a good-for-nothing young lady who had been ignored by them for a long time, with the power of one person, reversed the situation and stirred up the situation of this country. They had indeed lost. Dusk, sunset. In the entire defense general's residence, all the stewards were either removed or driven away. In just a short time, they had been replaced by Hellion Vivian's people. She stood alone in the middle of the courtyard, dressed in white, with long sleeves fluttering in the wind. Young master. Da Xiong knelt down on one knee. Hellion Vivian smiled. 7 years, a whole 7 years. I didn't even have the qualifications to stand in the main courtyard before. Young master. Da Xiong opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something. Hellion Vivian raised her eyes. Her eyebrows were like a painting. From now on, the Hellion clan. Things. Return. Original. Master. Yes, yes, yes. 3 kowtows sounded. First, it was the stewards, then the guards, and finally, the thousands of hidden soldiers led by Kai Yang. Ambushing troops filled the courtyard, only bowing down to Hellion Wei. Such a scene reminded many old people of the time when old Master Hellion was still alive. There were discussions in the capital city, saying that the Hellion clan was really going to make a comeback this time. When Prime Minister Su heard the news, he vomited another mouthful of blood from his already severely ill body. Before night fell, he had received a message from Hellion Vivian. Prime Minister Su narrowed his eyes, his expression cold. No. Prime Minister Su, do you not want to see me, or do you not dare to? Hellion Vivian walked into the inner residence. The guards were all taken care of by the little 7th prince who followed behind her. Prime Minister Su looked at her and coughed a few times. He put on a fake smile and said, "Princess, what are you talking about? I've been ill for a long time. I don't attend the imperial court, and I don't see any important guests. This is something that everyone knows. That's why I said that I don't want to see you. Lord Su is really magnanimous." Hellion Vivian smiled. I know that Lord Su just defeated Hellion Guangyaro yesterday and planned to take back the power of the Su family. However, you realized that even though Hellion Guangyaro was defeated, it was hard to take back the power. Lord Su, do you want to know why? When Prime Minister Su heard the name Hellion Guangyaro, his hands that were clutching his sleeves trembled in anger. Hellion Wei continued, "That's because the forces that Lord Su once sent out have long fallen into my hands. I don't think I need to teach Lord Su how to be a fisherman when the clam fights, right? You." Prime Minister Su pressed his hand on his chest. Hellion Vivian tidied her robe casually. "Even the woman who got close to Hellion Guangyaro and took away your daughter's love was sent by me. I wanted to let Prime Minister Su have a taste of what it feels like to have your family taken away by your son-in-law." You. Prime Minister Su bent over in pain. Hellion Wei smiled faintly. "It's getting late, Prime Minister Su, you should rest well. With your current condition, you won't be able to live much longer. I'm just curious, so I'm here to ask you, how does it feel to be slapped in the face?" "You, fart." Prime Minister Su couldn't hold it in anymore. His throat churned and he spat out mouthfuls of blood. Hellion Vivian wiped away the bloodstains and smiled. How could I forget that Lord Su can't get angry because of his illness? Hellion Vivian. Prime Minister Su roared with the last of his strength. Do you think that you can take revenge for your family if I die? Ha ha ha, how naive. A martial arts aristocratic family with accumulated military exploits, as well as one of the founding fathers of the nation. Do you think that by relying on me and the Empress, you can topple old man Hellion? If you don't have great power, who can touch him? Even if you get the Hellion family, you may not be able to take revenge for them. They wanted Old Master Hellion to die, and Old Master Hera also died. Do you know why this happened? Even the Emperor wouldn't necessarily want your Hellion family to flourish that much. Ha 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 ha. Prime Minister Su laughed and coughed at the same time. His pale face was filled with pride. Hellion Vivian bent over and tilted her body. Isn't it just 3 elders and an incapable ruler? I have my own ideas on how to deal with them. The most important thing is to see Prime Minister Su's family ruined and dead, lying here like a rotten egg. That's my purpose this time. You, fut, fut, fut. Prime Minister Su spat out blood again. His eyes widened and he was completely out of breath. When Hellion Vivian came out of the Su residence, she heard the ringing of the funeral bell. And she was getting closer and closer to her goal, at night, in the south study room deep in the palace. Under layers of curtains, the Emperor sat in the white smoke. He was becoming more and more obsessed with alchemy to achieve longevity. He had reached a certain point. The 3 elders sat opposite him and said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, it's time to deal with this Hellion Vivian. Isn't she doing well?" The Emperor laughed and looked at the elixir in his hand crazily. "Why should I deal with her?" The 3 elders looked at him and said in a deep voice, "We shouldn't deal with her because of her recent behavior. We should deal with her because of the incident of body possession. We suspect that this Hellion Vivian has indeed been possessed. Not only is her behavior not like before, but the water pump she made in Fuping is also unheard of. Such a person must have been possessed. Your Majesty, do you still remember the horror of body possession? A priest once said that once a body possession person appears, it means that the devil is on the rampage. At that time, Your Majesty's throne might be threatened." Chapter 531. Moreover. One of the elders paused and looked at the Emperor's side profile. She's also the royal consort. The Emperor's hand that was holding the spiritual pill paused and then slowly tightened. "Are you sure that Hellion Vivian was possessed?" 80%. Elder Feng smiled. "As for whether it's true or not, we'll know once we try." The Emperor lowered his eyes and took a sip of tea. After a while, he asked, "How do we try?" On the day of the royal wedding, 18 eminent monks of the Hidden Spirit Temple chanted the incantation together. If it wasn't for the appearance of the fire Cheline, Hellion Vivian might have been exposed. Elder Feng lowered his voice. "Why don't we try again, Your Majesty?" The Emperor glanced at him without any expression on his face. 18 eminent monks entered the capital at the same time. "Do you think you can hide it from the third prince?" "You don't have to worry about this, Your Majesty. We've already thought of an excuse, and it's perfectly justified." Elder Feng's voice was deep. "There haven't been many in the palace recently. According to the subordinates, there are always palace maids who mysteriously disappear, and even their corpses can't be found. We can use this as an excuse to invite the eminent monks into the palace, saying that they're here to resolve their grievances. This way, the royal family won't suspect anything. The retired emperor has already started to write the rules, so they'll definitely investigate. Since that's the case, why don't we let our people investigate? Don't you think so, Your Majesty?" The emperor turned the spiritual pill in his hand. "You're saying that the retired emperor has already sent people to investigate the palace maids? How come I don't know about this? There's still no news." Elder Feng moved closer. "The retired emperor has always done things quietly. If I didn't get some information from the side, I wouldn't have realized that the retired emperor has the intention to manage the palace again. He probably wants the royal family to get the hang of it as soon as possible." This time, the royal family disguised themselves and went to the provincial capital. It can be said that they've won over many people and planted many of their own people in the 6 ministries. If this continues, I'm really worried that your majesty won't be able to control the situation in the future. When the emperor heard this, he looked at the flickering candlelight and narrowed his eyes. Let's do as the 3 elders say and try. Yes. The 3 of them looked at each other and saw the smiles on each other's faces that indicated that they had succeeded in their scheme. The night deepened. After leaving the imperial palace, the elders boarded their respective carriages. No one noticed that there was a black dot behind the neck of one of the elders. It was a black spot that only possessed people would have. Under the moonlight, there were actually 2 shadows swaying under one person's feet. It was indescribably terrifying. Master, our plan is going well. Is she going to wake up soon? The little one carried a huge gourd on his back and looked up at the white-robed man. The man leaned over and stroked its head. If you want her to wake up, this is not enough. Then what else do you need? The little one blinked. The man smiled, as gentle as the wind. Demons walk freely. Tick-tock. The rain beat against the window. Hellion Vivian absent-mindedly looked at herself walking in the palace. It was a place she had never been before. There was a very deep river, and the bottom of the river could not be seen. There was an indescribable smell. That smell, she was very familiar with. There was a smell of rust in the salty sweetness, floating in the air, making people feel very uncomfortable. Hellion Vivian did not know how she came here. She wanted to call Yuan Ming out, but she found that she could not activate the fantasy space. There was no sign of Xiao Qi or anyone else. Except the Hellion Vivian that she dreamed of before. She looked at her from the riverside with tears in her eyes. In an instant, she was in front of her. Her face was as pale as a sheet of paper. Why won't you return my body to me? Why? Hellion Vivian did not move. She let her shout as her eyes were clear. The Hellion Vivian did not expect her to be so calm. Her eyes narrowed little by little, and then she wrapped her arms and legs around Hellion Vivian's body. You can't escape. You can deal with anyone, but you can never deal with me. Because this body is mine, and it can only be mine. The hands that wrapped around her were like unknown tentacles. No matter how hard she tried, she could not get rid of them. Gradually, Hellion Vivian felt something spread to her waist. When she looked again, she did not know when, but she was standing in the river. The river water was dark red, and a white hand was pulling her hand, trying to pull her into the river. Third sister-in-law, third sister-in-law. Hellion Wei opened her eyes abruptly. The first thing she saw was little Seven's fierce little face. He was lying on the bed, looking at her worriedly with a pair of tiger-like eyes. Behind him stood Beligaju, who was cold. He must have just returned from outside. He did not have time to take off his fur coat, and his body was still wet. He reached out and brushed the wet hair on her forehead. His eyes darkened slightly. What did you dream of? Nothing. Hellion Vivian reached out and put her arms around his thin waist. She buried her face in his calming chest. I'm still sleepy. Let's go back to sleep. Beligaju pulled her away and looked at her with his deep eyes. Then he said to the little one standing beside him, Xiao Qi, go back to sleep. I want to sleep with third brother and third sister-in-law. The little one said fiercely, I don't want to sleep on the bed. This bed is too soft. I'll sleep on the floor. Third brother, don't step on my stomach when you get up. Beligaju glanced at him. Do you want to take off your pants and dance again? No. The little one jumped up at once. With a calm face, he said, I'm going back to sleep now. I just came back to the palace recently. I'm very busy there. Third brother, you'd better not look for me all the time. That's all. After saying that, the little one slipped away at lightning speed. Hellion Vivian found it funny. Beligaju reached out and lifted her chin. Is there someone who wants to take over your body? Hellion Vivian was stunned. She instinctively wanted to call Yuan Ming out. Yuan Ming shrugged. Your man is very smart and unfathomable. I don't know how he can guess correctly. But it's strange. If he's here, the other party won't be so arrogant when you have nightmares. Like today, I can't even get into your dream. It's very dangerous. As soon as he came in, The river receded. Don't you think it's strange? I'm just wondering how he knows. Hellion Vivian glared at Yuan Ming. She got out of the fantasy space and looked into Belegaju's eyes. She told him the truth. In the dream, you didn't succeed in taking over my body. Belegaju picked her up and put her in his arms. He rested his chin on her hair as if he was thinking about something. Chapter 532. Hellion Vivian stretched her arms and legs and said absent-mindedly, I think it's quite successful. This body seems to be mine. It looks exactly the same as when I was in modern times. Belegaju's hand on her waist tightened, but he didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian looked at him and lowered her eyes slightly. Do you know the old Hellion Vivian? Yes. Belegaju's fingers tangled in her hair and his voice was as noble as usual. What's wrong? Hellion Vivian shook her head. Nothing, it's just that. She actually wanted to ask how he felt about the old Hellion Vivian. In her dream, when she was young, Hellion Vivian seemed to have sent him a few pieces of pastries. At that time, Belegaju was still a cold and unfavored little prince. Hellion Vivian was the most favored granddaughter of Old Master Hellion. She often went in and out of the palace and was very popular with people of the same age. Even Belegaju seemed to treat her differently. Hellion Vivian looked up and smiled. You seem to be very concerned about my body. Shouldn't I care? Bailey Jiaoju took the cloak and wrapped it around her body. Then, he pulled her into his arms. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment and said, You should be concerned. What? Do you think I'm too strict with you? Belegaju pinched her wrist and smiled. Your claws have been a lot quieter recently. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile. I'm a domineering president. I'm the loyal dog type. I won't scratch people casually. Why do I feel like I can't raise you properly? Belegaju hugged her and said in a deep voice, No one can take you away from me, including yourself. Do you understand? Hellion Vivian was stunned. She looked up at the sky. I didn't say I was going to run away. Didn't I let you lock me up? Speaking of which, shouldn't you change that lock of yours? It's all the same design. It's not challenging at all. You think those locks are for you to play with? Belegaju kissed the tip of her ear. However, it is indeed time to change. You like it made of gold. Hellion Vivian looked at him seriously. Actually, you don't have to go through so much trouble to please me. I like it better if you exchange the lock for banknotes. With this kind of taste, how did you become a princess? Belegaju gave a long sigh, but it was not hard to see the smile on his face. Hellion Wei leaned on him leisurely. You were the one who chose it. It's not too late to ask for a refund. Return it. Belegaju looked at her expression. His long and narrow eyes deepened. In the end, he just took her hand and played with it in his hand. It seemed like he liked it a lot. Sometimes, this king thinks you are very smart. Sometimes, I want to see if your head is filled with cotton balls or not. From the beginning, I gave you all the financial expenses. Did you forget? Hellion Vivian. She really forgot about this matter. When Bailey Jiaoju saw her expression, he knew that she didn't remember it. The corners of his mouth curled up, then he stood up and said, So, you can take as much as you want in banknotes as you want. Why do you have to ask me? She couldn't say that she was used to taking advantage of others. Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something. Her eyebrows raised. Then wouldn't your food and clothes be in my hands in the future? Yes. Belegaju's voice was indifferent. He reached out and pulled open his collar. Hellion Vivian smiled. Very good. In the future, if this king was not obedient, she would learn from him and make him eat only vegetables and not meat. Do you need this king to remind you? Even if this king doesn't have money, there is still meat to eat. Belegaju threw his outer robe to the side and looked at her playfully. I am still the one in charge here. What we eat today and what we eat tomorrow. The imperial kitchen also listens to this king. The money is in your hands, but you are still in my hands. Come here. Hellion Vivian ignored him. But he picked her up. One of his hands was by her side, and the other hand was undoing her robe. His slender fingers were slightly cold. Do you want to be on top or bottom today? Neither. Hellion Vivian buried her face in his inner robe. I want to sleep. My eyes hurt. Beligaju stopped and frowned. What's wrong with your eyes? Sleepy. Hellion Vivian was also looking for an excuse. Bailey Jiaoju did not let her sleep. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. With one hand, he took a bottle of Tianshan Snow Lotus powder from beside the bed. With the other hand, he gently lifted her face and sprinkled the powder on her eyelids. Hellion Vivian smelled it and knew that it was Tianshan Snow Lotus. It faintly merged with the man's scent. So rich. Even the eye drops are from Tianshan Snow Lotus. Sure enough, he was not just a little rich. He spent a lot of effort on this body. Beligaju looked at her with a faint smile. What are you muttering about again? I'm not muttering anything. I'm just wondering if your family knows that you're so rich. Hellion Vivian yawned casually. Thinking about that dream, her eyebrows wrinkled. Beligaju curved his thin lips and said slowly, of course they know. My money is all managed by my wife. Don't you know this the best? Hellion Vivian was not very comfortable because of that dream and wanted to vent her anger on a certain highness, who knew that she couldn't win against him and couldn't get anything out of him. She just closed her eyes and rubbed the pillow from time to time with a light face. Beligaju pulled her back and patted her back with his left hand. His voice was low and pleasant. Are you angry that I have more money than you? After all, she said that she wanted to become the richest person in the entire Dragon War Empire. Although there were very few people who took this as their life goal, it was obvious that this little thing belonged to a very small part of them. What do you mean yours? That's mine. Hellion Vivian became spirited. What's yours is mine, do you understand? Beligaju put one hand behind his head and smiled charmingly. I understand, great patron. Not bad, very good. Hellion Vivian was very satisfied and the smile on her face became even wider. Beligaju raised his eyebrows. Then what about yours? Mine. Of course it's still mine. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and put her head on his chest. Beligaju laughed in a low voice. You still say that you won't scratch people. That's just the logic of a bandit. Then why aren't you returning the goods? Hellion Vivian's voice faded. The last syllable was hidden at the bottom, so low that it was a bit vague. Bailey Jiaoju's pair of extremely deep phoenix eyes heavily narrowed for a moment, as if all of his hostility was rolling out. Even his voice was full of danger. Don't let me hear the two words return the goods again, or else. Chapter 533. Otherwise, you'll break my legs. You've said this more than 10 times already. Hellion Wei indifferently closed her eyes. Her hand was still on Bailey Jiaoju's waist. She had a fearless expression. If you have the ability, then beat me to death. Beligaju smiled. Who said that I'm going to break your legs? What else can I do? Hellion Vivian yawned. Beligaju lowered his head and leaned over. His thin lips fell behind her ear. I can. I want you to be unable to get out of bed. Unable to get out of bed? Hellion Vivian stopped yawning. She didn't even look at that godlike handsome face. She turned around and wanted to escape. However, she found that she couldn't escape at all. She was the one hugging him. Who asked his body to smell so good? Her actions were all subconscious. Now, he only needed to reach out a hand and press on her back. Then, she wouldn't be able to move at all. I think it's better if we fight. Hellion Vivian moved. Her eyes flickered and she began to change the topic. Think about it. We're both top experts in the capital, right? Don't you think it's a pity that we haven't fought yet? Beligaju glanced at her. Experts? You? Hellion Vivian. What kind of look is that? Originally, Hellion Vivian didn't really want to fight. Now that he was looking at her like this, she had to fight. I can fight with you. Beligaju's thin lips fell on her lips. If I win, you can take the initiative tonight. Hellion Vivian didn't want to agree at first. However, her eyes lit up and she agreed very quickly. Okay, but if I win, you have to let me lock you up once. After being locked up so many times, she had to take revenge. Lock me up. Beligaju's lips curled up. His tone was a little slow. Okay. Hellion Vivian thought about it and said, you can't bring the fire, Chelene. Okay. Beligaju put his hand on her head and stroked her hair. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. So easy to talk to. Do I need to bring a fire Kirene to deal with you? Beligaju's thin lips curved, and there was a smile in his voice. It was that look of contempt again. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and said, "You can't wear the armament I made for you either." This time, Beligaju did not immediately agree. Hellion Vivian smiled. "What? Don't you think it's easy to deal with me? Do you think it will be difficult to win if I don't let you bring armaments?" Wei. When Beligaju said those two words, he smiled faintly. "Why don't you tell me what you want your husband to bring?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and glanced at his extremely two-faced appearance. Then, she leaned over and kissed his eyes. "I won't bring anything. You have to yield to me." Beligaju pondered and raised his eyebrows. "You want to tie me up that much?" That wasn't the main point. The main point was to take the initiative. How could she take the initiative? Hellion Vivian smiled. "Then it's settled. I'll go call Little White out first. Also, I remember that I put my 1000-chance umbrella in the drawer. Do you want this lord to give the fire Cheline to you and have it listen to your commands?" Beligaju put his hands behind his head and crossed his slender legs. Hellion Vivian buried her head and tidied up her things. She didn't forget to turn her head and say, "No need. Don't try to send the fire Cheline to my side as a spy. I won't accept it." She had integrity. "You really don't need it." Beligaju slowly sat up. His robes fell down and his slender fingers played with the silver ring on his finger. His voice was indifferent. "With the fire Cheline, you still have a chance to win." Hellion Wei took her own metal box and picked out a few pieces of pastries. She put one in his mouth and ate one herself before saying, "You're so kind, it's too abnormal." "Your Highness, do you think I don't know? There is a contract between a divine beast and its master. One of the contracts is that the divine beast can't attack its master." Beligaju slowly swallowed the food in his mouth. Hellion Vivian saw that he finished eating and gave him another piece. Beligaju looked at her actions. His eyes carried a warmth that had never been seen in front of others. "It's rare that you know this." It seemed that this time, he had to think of another way to make her take the initiative. "Hair. That's why I said that I studied a lot. Don't lie to me." Hellion Vivian clapped her hands. "The desserts are also finished. Let's start." Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. "Okay." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and looked at him. Her finger moved and the wind formed in the air drifted towards Beligaju's direction. However, when the wind arrived in front of him, it was like it was blocked by a screen. It didn't have any effect. Instead, it gently dispersed. Crash, crash. More than half of the porcelain behind him broke. Hellion Vivian was stunned at first. Then, she smiled. Her body turned and like a shadow, she appeared in front of Beligaju with a whoosh. She raised her left leg high and was about to chop down at Beligaju. But in the next moment, she abruptly pulled back and took a few steps back. Her eyebrows slightly wrinkled. "You didn't use martial chi? Didn't you say that I should let you win?" Beligaju grabbed her hand and pulled her into his arms. "Okay, now that you've won, how do you want to tie me up?" Hellion Vivian didn't answer his question. Instead, she frowned. "Why didn't you use martial chi just now?" Beligaju didn't say anything. He just slightly narrowed his eyes. For no reason, people couldn't help but have a cold feeling that made them want to investigate. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She directly lifted his hand. "Your martial chi disappeared? It's temporary." Beligaju seemed to be used to it. He put down his long sleeves. The side of his face was perfect and cold like a sculpture. Hellion Vivian remembered that he was also in this situation last time. She quickly looked at his eyes. "Can you still see? Did I hurt you just now? You don't have martial chi, but you still agreed to my competition. Didn't you always want to win against me?" Beligaju chuckled. "This is a good opportunity." Hellion Vivian glared at him. "Quickly go back and lie down. You're not tying me up." Beligaju raised his lips and smiled. Hellion Vivian was helpless. She directly pushed someone's back and pushed him to the side of the dragon bed. Lie down. Just lie down. Beligaju looked at her with a faint smile. He sighed slightly. Okay, if only I could recover my martial chi. Fire Chelin couldn't stand it anymore. He couldn't help but jump out. Master, what are you planning? You obviously didn't lose your martial chi. It must be a trick of self-injury. Master, is it really good for you to be so shameless? Get out. Bailey Jiaju unhurriedly gave the order. His voice carried a hint of evil intent. I don't like people watching me do things. Chapter 534. It knew it was a trick of self-injury. It just didn't know what Master was planning. Why aren't you leaving? Beligaju glanced at Fire Chelin and said calmly, do you want me to lock you up again? Fire Chelin's red fur trembled. It didn't dare to stay any longer. It turned around and left the palace. It stretched out its claws and wiped off its cold sweat. Master was too ruthless. He actually wanted to lock it up again. It didn't want to go to that little black hole to reflect on its mistakes. It was very troublesome without butterflies. Besides, it had so many worshippers, it couldn't just be locked up like that. Yes, boss. Boss is so handsome. Yes, he is handsome. But why does boss's expression look so bad? The little spirit beasts that were hiding outside the palace looked at Fire Chelin in unison. Their big watery eyes were very bright. Fire Chelin immediately stood up straight. It raised its head and puffed out its chest. Its posture was very good. What a cool boss. Boss is definitely going to go in. It can't be. Didn't boss just come out from there? Boss just came out to take a walk and see if we are in danger. After that, it will go in. Fire Chelin. When did it say it was going to go in? It didn't dare to go in again. Boss. A little earth beast ran over and said shyly, if you go in, can you bring us with you? We always wanted to see how beautiful that big house is. Fire Chelin just opened its mouth. Another little earth beast interrupted it. Boss is so handsome. It will definitely agree to us. Really? The little earth beast squatting in front of Fire Chelin looked up with bright eyes. Then, boss, let's go in quickly. Fire Chelin, why did things develop to this point? It didn't say anything. Don't make up stories. Cough, cough. Fire Chelin coughed twice. It seemed to have thought of something. You just said that you are in danger. What danger are you in? The little earth beasts looked at each other and then looked left and right. Something came to the palace recently. It's very scary. What is it? The Fire Chelin suddenly narrowed its eyes. The little earth beasts shook their heads. We're not too sure either. As soon as it appeared, we all hid. Why can't I sense it? The Fire Chelin looked at its own claws. If there was some kind of beast, it would be impossible for it not to smell it. The little earth beasts lowered their voices and said, that thing knows how to hide. There are humans covering for it. Boss hasn't been in the palace these days, and it has already created a lot of resentment. Where is it now? Fire Chelin's eyes narrowed. The little earth beasts shook their heads again. I don't know. We never fought it head-on. All the little earth beasts that met it were devoured by it. At this point, the little earth beasts clearly felt fear, and their small bodies began to tremble. However, we know roughly where it is. We have never dared to go to that place. As they spoke, the little earth beasts pointed towards the east. It's there. Chaoyang Hall? The Fire Chelin paused and frowned. Wasn't that where the emperor lived? Just as the Fire Chelin was deep in thought, a figure suddenly appeared behind it. The little earth beasts huddled together in fear. BB Boss. The Fire Chelin naturally felt the presence behind it. Just as it was about to raise its claws, the person hugged its neck. Third brother isn't here today. I must eat you. The Fire Chelin immediately knew who the voice belonged to. Seventh Highness. Chelin meat should be very delicious. The little one poked its head with a finger with a serious face. The Fire Chelin then remembered that it was invisible. Logically speaking, other than its master, normal humans shouldn't be able to see it. Then, what's going on with Seventh Highness? The Fire Chelin suddenly raised its head. For the first time, It seriously looked at the little one that it was familiar with. It slowly narrowed its eyes. Lil Seven didn't care what it was thinking. While third brother wasn't here, it must be roasted. The little one bent his head to take a look. Then, he directly pulled the fire Chaline's tail and dragged it forward. He didn't care whether his action would cause the surrounding plants to wither or not. In short, no one could stop him from eating. In the room, Belagaju could clearly see this scene through the window. His thin lips curved, as if he was very satisfied with this situation where 2 light bulbs were removed at the same time. Hellion Vivian was still worried about his eyes. When did this situation start? What situation? Belagaju retracted his gaze. He seemed to be a little weak. Hellion Vivian looked at his slightly pale lips. You lose your martial chi from time to time. Is it because of the fire? Sort of. Belagaju's hand paused. He seemed to be indifferent. You know about that fire too? Hellion Vivian nodded. Everyone in the capital knows. It said that the fire was very big. The entire palace was destroyed. From that day onwards, you had a serious illness and lost all your martial chi. Serious illness? Bailey Jiaoju faintly smiled with a hint of mockery. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Is it wrong? No, it's very right. Belagaju pulled her over. There was a dark light in his eyes. There were some things that he couldn't let her know, absolutely not. Hellion Vivian looked up at him. Don't worry, I won't let those who hurt you have an easy time. They made you become like this, so I will make them bleed. Belagaju looked at the serious little face in front of him. He turned over and pressed Hellion Vivian into the bright red brocade quilt. His eyes sank. I don't have any martial chi now. Dual cultivation is the fastest and most effective way to recover my martial chi. It's just that my eyes can't see clearly, so you have to take the initiative. He's right about this. Yuan Ming couldn't wait to jump out. Woman, quickly dual cultivate. Dual cultivation is good for both of you. If he can recover his martial chi, you can also. Without waiting for Yuan Ming to finish speaking, Hellion Vivian closed her eyes and closed the fantasy space. Her eyes met the handsome face that could enchant any woman. Just as she hesitated, she heard Belagaju's low voice. It was hoarse. If you don't want to, I won't force you. Who said I don't want to? Isn't it just taking the initiative? Hellion Vivian paused for a moment. Then, she did as she said. She directly leaned over and kissed Belagaju's face. Then, she kissed his lips and his well-defined jaw. Chapter 535. Hellion Vivian didn't see the faint smile on the man's face. His long robe fell and rose and fell until Hellion Wei leaned over awkwardly. However, he suddenly regained his strength and pressed his palm on her back. Your skills are so bad. You. Hellion Wei's pair of eyes were dyed red. That pair of eyes looked more beautiful than ever before, enough to evoke the thought of completely destroying her. Belagaju didn't intend to hold back. He put more strength on his waist and pressed his forehead against hers. He chuckled, it's rare to see you like this. Sure enough, when you take the initiative, it makes people want to tear you apart even more. Bye. Belagaju. Hellion Vivian instantly understood what was going on. You didn't lose your martial chi at all. Belagaju kissed her gently and said, let me teach you what it means to attack the heart first. I hid my martial chi, so you will definitely be anxious. Shameless. Hellion Vivian bit her thin lips and stretched her neck, but she couldn't resist the numbness. Belagaju smiled wickedly. If I'm not shameless, how can I let you take the initiative? Be good, it will make you feel good. Their voices gradually faded, and the red curtain fell, rippling layers of ripples. God knows how long it took. If the retired emperor didn't send someone to wait outside the palace, it was estimated that it would be endless. However, His Highness, who was interrupted, was not in a good mood. His finely made black nightgown was half open, and his ink-black hair hung down on both sides. His handsome side profile was still cold and noble. What's the matter? Why are you so anxious? It's the little 7th prince. The eunuch didn't dare to raise his head to look at him and replied with a numb scalp. Belagaju drank a mouthful of tea handed over by Shadow and said in a calm voice, What's wrong with the little seventh prince? The little seventh prince caught the mythological beast fire Cheline and insisted on roasting it. When he said this, the eunuch felt that it was inconceivable. What kind of thing was the fire Cheline? It was the head of the four great mythological beast. Many people who saw it only wanted to tame it for their own use. Only the little seventh prince wanted to eat it. Beligaju slowly raised his eyes. Then let him roast it. Ah! The eunuch couldn't believe his ears. If he remembered correctly, wasn't the fire Cheline the royal family's mount? His Highness actually agreed. Originally, Eunuch's son called him over to ask the royal family to stop the little seventh prince. The little Highness only listens to the royal family. Now, the royal family had no intention of stopping them. How was he going to report back? The retired emperor was so angry that he wanted to kick the little seventh prince out of the palace again. If he roasted the fire Cheline, the little seventh prince would definitely be chased back to the mountain. Although the little seventh prince usually ate whatever he saw, which made them feel helpless, with the little seventh prince around, the palace was always livelier. Both the retired emperor and eunuch's son seemed to be in a good mood. These 2 days, the palace was getting gloomier and gloomier. They really didn't want the little seventh prince to leave. Just when the eunuch was full of worry, the curtain moved and Hellion Vivian walked out in a white robe. She glanced at Beligaju and said, "Roasting the fire Cheline is not a good way to cook. His Highness won't be anxious if you say so. The little seventh prince knows how to eat. He hunted such a nutritious fire Cheline. Where is he? I'll go and take a look and tell him how to cook this dish." The eunuch. He was here to ask someone to stop the little seventh prince, not to ask for help. Even the princess consort was thinking about the fire Cheline, and just now, the princess consort glared at His Highness. "Your Highness, how did you provoke the little seventh prince and the princess consort? They treat your mount like this." Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian with a faint smile. The eunuch saw hope in an instant. "His Highness, stop her. Stop the princess consort. I'm also curious how to cook the fire Cheline." Bailey Jiaoju walked up to Hellion Wei Wei and reached out to pull her into his arms, making her whole body stick close to him. He rubbed her waist with his fingers and said, "Shall we go and have a look together?" Hellion Vivian could still feel the heat on his body. She didn't dare to move, afraid that he would do something else. Her ears turned red, at this time, in the palace where the retired emperor lived. Eunuch's son's mouth was dry. "Little master, this fire Cheline can't be eaten. Let's eat something else, okay?" "No." The little one did not even raise his head. He strode forward with his thick little legs and dragged the fire Cheline forward again, exerting his strength with a whoosh sound. Eunuch's son still wanted to say something. The retired emperor took a deep breath and said, "Let him eat it. I'd like to see how he roasted the fire Cheline. He's getting more and more ridiculous. Imperial grandfather, you're blocking my way." The little one raised his little face and said, "You have to move away so that I can roast the fire Cheline. You've been blocking my way since just now. Can't you let me eat in peace?" The retired emperor pointed at him and said, You. I want to start a fire." The little one squatted down and asked, "Imperial grandfather, please get me some firewood." Third sister-in-law said that it's delicious to roast with fruit wood. The retired emperor was so angry that he laughed. "How dare you ask me for firewood? You brat. Where's third brother? Why isn't he here yet? You called third brother." With a swoosh, the little one straightened his body and pulled the fire Cheline's tail over. Shaking his short little legs, he attempted to slip away. However, before he could take a step, a faint voice came from behind. "Where are you dragging the fire Cheline to?" The little one froze and turned to look at Beligaju. The fire Cheline let out a long sigh and communicated with Beligaju through consciousness. "Master, you're finally here. The little seventh prince is too strong. I can't get rid of him. Hurry up and let him let go of my tail." Beligaju looked at the fire Cheline slowly. He did not respond to the fire Cheline. Instead, he smiled and said, "If you want to eat, you can eat here." "Really?" The little one's eyes lit up. The fire Cheline was petrified. Wait a minute. What's going on?" Is Master really going to let the little seventh prince eat me? Although my skin is thick and can't be roasted, I'll be embarrassed if other spirit beasts see me like this. Since Master won't save me, I can only save myself. Don't run. The little one pulled its tail and said seriously, "Third brother said to eat here." When the fire chaleen was pulled, the things around it trembled. Hellion Vivian looked at the little seventh prince's actions and frowned. Although she knew that the little seventh prince was strong, wasn't it a little too unusual for him to be able to grab the fire chaleen? Chapter 536. The fire chaleen also paused. It had used 30% of its strength just now. Why couldn't it get rid of him with 30% of its strength? What was going on? The fire chaleen subconsciously looked at Belagaju. "Master." Belagaju raised his hand, indicating that it didn't need to say anything. The little one reached out and tied the fire chaleen to the side. Then, he carried the dried fruit over. He tilted his head and thought for a while. Then, he leaned over and bit the fire chaleen. The fire chaleen suddenly moved. Its eyes darkened even more. It immediately turned around and began to communicate with Belagaju. "Master, I felt pain just now. Logically speaking, even a spirit beast wouldn't make me feel pain, let alone a human." Everyone knew that the chaleen's skin was thick and invulnerable. However, the little one in front of him could hurt it. This was not normal. "It doesn't taste good." The little one spat out. Hellion Vivian walked over and said with a wicked smile, "It won't taste good if you eat it raw. You need to add seasoning. Make it for me, third sister-in-law." After the little one finished speaking, he hugged Belagaju's leg. "Third brother, lend third sister-in-law to me for a while. I want to eat chaleen meat." Belagaju glanced at him and said in a calm voice, "Eat a mouthful of chaleen meat and dance for a day. You decide whether to eat it or not." When the little one heard the word dance, his little hands instinctively covered his pants. He shook his head like a rattledrum. "Third brother, you can't always make me dance. That's not right. Do you want to eat it or not?" Belagaju didn't even listen to him. He reached out and picked the little one up. The little one was anxious. His little legs swayed back and forth. He pouted and didn't say anything. Belagaju raised him until they were at eye level. He said calmly, "If you don't eat the fire chaleen, I'll give you 10 more meat buns. I want to eat 20. 10 is too little." The little one's eyes lit up again. Belagaju smiled. "You want to negotiate? Forget it, you should just dance. 15. The little one pouted. "Third brother, I can't go any lower." Belagaju turned around and ordered Eunuch's son, "Go get him 15 meat buns." "Yes." Eunuch's son looked at the sky silently. If he had known that the meat bun would be able to solve the problem, why would he have waited here for so long? However, the little one felt that he had profited. He counted with his small hands and said, "Third brother, 15 meat buns. I can eat 3 meat buns a day for 5 days. I just bit into the fire chaleen's meat, and it doesn't taste good at all. Fire chaleen, how dare he despise it? There's nothing delicious about its hard skin," Belagaju said calmly. Fire chaleen was speechless. However, Belagaju lowered his eyes and continued, "You have to remember that you can't eat my food." Hearing these words, the retired emperor was somewhat gratified. This was how the child should be educated. The little one frowned. "What about imperial grandfather's food?" "Up to you." Belagaju gave the little one 2 words and left with the fire chaleen and the others. The retired emperor's roar could be heard faintly. "Don't stop me. I'm going to teach those 2 a lesson today. Third sister-in-law, imperial grandfather's temper is getting worse." The little one took a bite of the meat bun. "We're already so obedient, but he's still so grumpy." Hellion Vivian pinched his face. "If you're really obedient, tell me how you dragged the fire chaleen here." "With my hands." The little one puffed up his cheeks. Hellion Vivian wiped the corner of his mouth with a handkerchief. "Little Seven, you have to restrain your strength in the future, especially in front of outsiders. Do you understand?" The little one paused and raised his eyes to look at his third brother. Belagaju nodded at him. "I know." The little one had a domineering look on his face. "I don't need to use my strength to beat them down. Third sister-in-law, Tell me if anyone bullies you. Tell me if you want to eat fish. I've been practicing my fishing recently. I've already eaten all the fish in Eunuch Sun's favorite pond. Hellion Vivian was silent. She thought that Eunuch Sun didn't know about this. If he knew, he wouldn't have stopped the retired emperor. The fire Cheline stood behind the two of them. It retracted its gaze from the little one and looked into Belegaju's eyes. Master, I'm sure that the little seventh prince is not an ordinary human. Who is born in the imperial family is ordinary. Belegaju turned the silver ring on his finger. In the flickering light, a trace of gold overflowed from his eyes. Arrange a few spirit beasts to follow Little Seven and protect him. The fire Cheline looked at its master's eyes and its heart skipped a beat. Yes. Why is this happening? I haven't found all the soul fragments. Why is my master showing signs of demonization? No. I have to increase the search for the soul fragments as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the soul is not complete, my master will be demonized completely. If that's the case, no one can stop him. Go to the Chaoyang Palace. Belegaju's voice sounded again. The fire Cheline narrowed its eyes. Master, you noticed it too? Of course I noticed it. The smell of blood is so strong. Belegaju licked his thin lips with the tip of his tongue. There was a hint of evil on his face. Find it for me. Yes. At dusk, the sun was setting. Hellion Vivian was leisurely drinking tea with Little Seven when they saw two palace maids walking out of the Chaoyang Palace. They looked around as if they were afraid of something. They even looked back every 3 steps. Usually, they wouldn't do this. After all, there were rules in the palace. How palace maids should walk and how they should greet their masters were all in accordance with the rules. But now, they seemed to be afraid of something and even forgot the rules. Eunuch Sunday. Hellion Vivian retracted her gaze and put the teacup on the table. What's wrong with those palace maids? Eunuch Sun poured her a cup of tea and lowered his voice. Princess Consort has been outside the palace for the past few days, so you don't know what's going on in the palace. I don't know what's going on in the palace, but there have been many palace maids dying in the palace. The way they died is very strange. Strange? Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. What's so strange? Eunuch Sun hesitated for a while before saying, someone drained their blood and threw them into the river. I don't know who did this. At first, the retired emperor didn't notice. After all, the palace is so big. No one would know if 2 or 3 palace maids died. Later, someone found 7 or 8 dried corpses by the river. This matter was revealed. But I don't know who the murderer is. The method is too cruel and evil. Today, the elders even told the retired emperor to invite some eminent monks to read scriptures. It's good to calm the people. Chapter 537. These elders are really interesting. So many people died, but what's the use of reading scriptures? Yuan Ming's mocking voice sounded. Hellion Vivian curled her lips. It's useless to the murderer, but it's useful to me, the possessor. Yuan Ming suddenly narrowed his eyes. It seems that we have the same idea. These eminent monks were most likely invited by those elders to deal with you. Hellion Vivian nodded. Holding the teacup, she leaned back and casually asked Eunuch Sun, the retired emperor should have agreed, right? He agreed. Eunuch Sun smiled. The elders said it in a justified manner, so there's nothing to decline. Princess Consort, you also know that those old officials, as long as they know their place, the retired emperor won't bother to say anything more to them. Hellion Vivian nodded. He should have agreed. If he didn't agree, it would make others think too much, and then the situation would be bad. The retired emperor asked this servant to inform Princess Consort. If you hear the Buddhist chanting, don't feel strange. It's said that they plan to chant for an entire day. I don't know if it has any effect. Eunuch Sun let out a long sigh. I've also seen those few little palace maids who died. It's a pity that they're all gone. Hellion Vivian's index finger rhythmically tapped the edge of the teacup. This was a movement she often did when she was thinking. Just now, Eunuch Sun said that the bodies were found by the river. I've been in the palace for so long, but I haven't seen a river in the palace. That area is remote. If you haven't been in the palace for a few years, you won't know. Eunuch Sun said this and looked to both sides. It's behind the cold palace. It's strange. It was originally just a small puddle of water that came in from the moat. I don't know what happened during this period, but the water level kept rising and became a river. If you ask this old servant, if the water level didn't rise, the situation wouldn't have been discovered so late. It's really a coincidence. Life and death are fated. Sigh. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian smiled meaningfully. It's really too much of a coincidence. Eunuch Sun was a very astute person. He didn't know how to analyze the case, but he was still obedient. When he saw that Hellion Vivian's tone wasn't right, he raised an eyebrow. Does Wang Fei mean that there is something else going on? Hellion Vivian put down the teacup in her hand and said, Eunuch Sun, do you still remember the mission the retired emperor gave us when His Highness and I went to Fuping? Yes. Eunuch Sun hurriedly said, Fuping has a large area and is suitable for farming. However, due to the severe drought in the past 2 years, the harvest has been seriously affected. The retired emperor has been worried about Fuping recently. Fortunately, Princess Consort and His Highness went to Fuping this time and solved this problem. Hellion Vivian smiled casually and said, Fuping isn't the only dry place. Even the capital hasn't had any rain recently. It's related to the season. Eunuch Sun, don't you think it's strange? Last month was the rainy season, but the small puddle you mentioned didn't rise much. This month, there hasn't been any rain for more than 10 days, but the puddle has risen. Don't you think it's strange? Eunuch Sun was stunned. Then, he suddenly stood up straight and looked very excited. Princess Consort. Eunuch Sunday. Before Eunuch Sun could continue, Hellion Vivian interrupted him. Eunuch Sun, just pretend that you didn't hear this. After all, if it wasn't because of the rain, it was very likely that there was a problem with the management of the moat. As for the flow of the moat, if it wasn't controlled by the higher-ups, no one would dare to make such a blatant change. Eunuch Sun's fingers trembled slightly. This is not a trivial matter. Precisely because it's not a trivial matter, Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and said, that's why Eunuch Sun can't mention it. Eunuch Sun glanced at Hellion Vivian and lowered his eyes, saying, this old servant understands. The moat was under the jurisdiction of the emperor's trusted subordinates. Even if the retired emperor's power was great, he was not in that position. Some things, as a servant, it was better for him not to say too much. But, why did it have to be the moat that had a problem? When will the eminent monks arrive? Hellion Vivian changed the topic with a light smile, as if she wanted to make Eunuch Sun feel more relaxed. Eunuch Sun pulled out of his thoughts, I heard that it's tomorrow at noon. It's not easy to find so many respected masters all of a sudden. We have to prepare more on time. That's right. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and took another sip of tea. The corner of her mouth hooked up into a cold smile. Yuan Ming took advantage of the fact that Eunuch Sun couldn't see him and approached Hellion Vivian's ear with an evil smile. They are so well prepared. It seems that they deliberately want to kill you. As soon as Elder Yun died, they became anxious. Hellion Vivian widened her eyes. The more anxious they are, the more it means that they are afraid. My grandfather was a military man, but he died a strange death. Now, it's clear who's behind this. Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows, but his smile didn't diminish. At that time, I was able to come to your side because you had hatred in your heart. That's why you woke me up in that kind of situation. Later on, Madame Su died, and that heartless father of yours was hacked to death by Prime Minister Su by the side of the road. The Hellion family was once again in your hands, but I didn't extricate myself from the contract. Without taking my revenge, I can't leave. From the very beginning, this matter wasn't simple. Hellion Vivian played with the teacup in her hand. Otherwise, why do you think I let the Su family stay for so long? Yuan Ming shrugged. That's what you say, but with your current ability, you can split them up and deal with them one by one. Once they join hands, I'm afraid that your future path will be very difficult. Previously, you were always in the dark. Because of your trash status, they didn't take precautions at all. Now, they are taking the initiative to attack. Are you sure you can withstand it? How long do you think I can last tomorrow? Hellion Vivian asked Yuan Ming in return. Yuan Ming stretched his waist. The current you is completely different from the time of your wedding. If it wasn't for the deep resentment in the palace, these scriptures might not have been able to force you out. What I'm afraid of is that you have been dreaming a lot recently, and your soul has long been somewhat unstable. If you're lucky, you can hold on for an hour. An hour. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. These masters chant scriptures in the early hours of the morning and at night. I don't have to appear, but they actually want to enter the palace by any means possible. They must have already thought of a reason that I must be present. Yuan Ming smiled. No matter how you look at it, it's a dead end. You might as well just give me your soul, and I'll help you kill them. Yuan Ming, how many times have I told you, I'm not interested in this deal of yours? Hellion Vivian stood up, her voice faint. As long as I'm still standing here, there's no such thing as a dead end. Chapter 538. Yuan Ming's interest was piqued. What do you plan to do? I'll make use of them to blow up the case in the palace. Then, I'll be able to investigate more thoroughly. Hellion Vivian played with the silver ring on her finger. However, I have a feeling that this case is not as simple as it seems. It is indeed not simple. Little White jumped out and said in a cold voice, I've just been to the river that the eunuch mentioned. The resentment is very strong. The bottom of the river has been dyed red with blood. According to the 5 elements and 8 trigrams, mountains belong to yang and water belongs to yin. Now that people have died in the water, it is simply a great ominous array. Then, it leaped forward. Look over there. Hellion Vivian followed its gaze and squinted. Dead fish. Eunuch's son also heard Hellion Vivian's words and said, Sigh, don't mention it. I don't know what is going on. For 2 days in a row, these fish have died in batches. Maybe the water quality is not good. Hellion Vivian retracted her gaze and waved at the little one. The little 7th prince was seriously eating a meat bun. When he saw Hellion Vivian calling him, he walked over with his little face held high. He was very domineering. Third sister-in-law, do you want to beat someone up? Let's go now. Hellion Vivian was speechless. Other than eating, he only knew how to beat people up. Is this really okay? No, I want to tell you that you can eat fish, but you can't eat the floating ones. Do you understand? Hellion Vivian squatted down and looked into the little one's eyes. Her eyes were full of love. The little one looked at the surface of the lake and then turned his head around. His little face was full of seriousness. I know. The smell of those fishies has spread all the way here. Third brother has told me before that I can't touch smelly things. Smelly? Little White moved the tip of its nose and its silver cat eyes darkened. Why didn't it smell it? Logically speaking, its sense of smell should be better than a child's. Yuan Ming smiled with an evil look. This little 7th prince is really interesting, isn't he? Little White raised its head and narrowed its eyes into a straight line. Do you know something? Is he on your side? Compared to you, I do know a little more. Yuan Ming smiled like a demon. The extra point is that I can be sure that he is not on our side. He does not have the demonic nature. Little White was in disbelief. Not a demon? Then what is he? No matter what he is, that woman has no intention of guarding against him. She even dotes on him like he's a treasure, so there's no need for us to find out. Yuan Ming looked at the surface of the lake and sighed deeply. I'm really becoming more and more handsome. Hellion Wei strolled over and pretended that she was going to burn the ancient book. Then I'll ask the increasingly handsome person to tell me everything you know. Little 7, what exactly is he? Hey. Yuan Ming jumped up and blew out the fire with a single breath. If there's anything you want to say it properly. Don't keep threatening this sovereign. Hellion Vivian put down the ancient book and crossed her arms. She raised her eyebrows and said, Speak. I'm just making some deductions. Yuan Ming smiled playfully. He has boundless strength at such a young age and his sense of smell is so sharp. He is even more powerful than Bai Zed's descendant. From the moment he was born, his body was full of righteousness and was impervious to evil. Apart from spirit beasts, I really can't think of anything else that can be like this. Hellion Vivian frowned. You're saying that Xiao Qi is not a human, but a beast? Spirit beasts also have a human form. Little White's voice was indifferent. Our bodies are divided into beast form and human form. It depends on which form is more convenient. But why can't I feel any spirit beast's aura on his body? Yuan Ming smiled evilly. You can't feel it because he is too powerful. He can bite through the fire Chiline's skin. Who do you think he is? You're saying that he... Little White suddenly raised his eyes and looked at the little person who was squatting and playing with the ants. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. When the exorcism seal fell and that person disappeared, even Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva couldn't appease him. That's why he didn't hesitate to summon the flames of hell in order to kill him. At that time, he was already swallowed by the flames, wasn't he? Yuan Ming laughed. Who knows what happened back then? Moreover, he is not like the fire Chiline. Even when he is always by that person's side, he rarely appears unless that person is in danger. Everyone says that the fire Chiline is the head of the 4 divine beasts because people often overlook it. If you think about it carefully, he is the one who has been by that person's side the longest. He is also the one who is the most difficult to deal with. Otherwise, why can't Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva appease him? But, how did he turn into a child? Little White hesitated and looked at the little person. Hellion Vivian could naturally hear the voices of these 2 people. She said indifferently, maybe he didn't change. That's right. Who said that he must change? Yuan Ming's eyes glowed. Maybe it's because his human form is that of a child. That's why that person, who doesn't even care about gods and demons, dotes on him endlessly. Hellion Vivian's expression was indifferent. That's not important. What's important is that Little Seven's abilities are different from ordinary people, but he can't control them well. Help me keep an eye on him in the future. Don't let the 4 great elders find out about him. You don't need us to keep an eye on him. Yuan Ming looked at the forest on the right. Your man has protected him very well. His abilities definitely didn't show up at this time. It's your man who has been good at using his methods for so many years that his abilities haven't been magnified. It's hard to control them recently. It's probably because the resentment in the palace is too strong. Just like in the White Academy, someone tried to use resentment to tame the divine dragon. However, the array formation this time isn't directed at him. When the little one saw that Hellion Vivian was standing there motionless, he immediately pricked up his little ears and called out, "Third sister-in-law, I've finished my meat bun." Hellion Vivian turned around and smiled. "Come here. I'll wipe your hands for you. You can eat the second one." "Okay." The little one nodded heavily and obediently stretched out his 2 little hands. Hellion Vivian smiled. She took the little one's hands and wiped them with a handkerchief. Then, she divided the meat bun into 2 halves and only gave him half. "Eat less. I'll make black pepper beef for you tonight." "Beef?" The little one's eyes lit up. He touched his body with a fierce expression. At first, Hellion Vivian didn't know what he was touching. When he pulled out the snake head from his clothes and threw it to the side in a domineering manner, Hellion Vivian pressed her forehead. "Little Seven, why are you grabbing these dangerous things?" Chapter 539. It's food. Little 7th Prince said seriously, "But I don't need it now. It's not as delicious as beef." "Green snake. You're so capricious. Have you considered our feelings as snakes?" Little 7th Prince saw that the snake was not moving, so he bent down and poked it with his finger. He said in a domineering manner, "Go away, or I'll feed you to the fire Chiline." Hearing the name of the fire Chiline, the green snake's expression changed. It disappeared into the bushes with a whoosh. Hellion Vivian found it funny. She pulled the little one over and walked side by side with him. "What else do you want to eat besides beef?" "Anything is fine." Little 7th Prince could be very calm sometimes. He was not a picky eater. Hellion Vivian said slowly, "How about I make you some potato chips?" "Potato chips?" The little one's eyes lit up as he scratched his little ears. He was very excited. "Okay." Hellion Wei watched as he kept scratching a certain spot, so she ordered someone to bring some medicine to stop the itch. Then, she said, "Then I'll make a plate of potato chips for you first. You can watch me cook while you eat." Okay. The little one nodded obediently. Hellion Vivian was almost melted by his cuteness. She smiled faintly and applied the medicine on his ears. The little one did not hide. Instead, he pouted and complained to Hellion Vivian, "Mosquitoes, you're so annoying. They bit you. Of course you'd hate them." Hellion Vivian rubbed his soft ears. The little one shook his little head and said, "Third sister-in-law, you're wrong. It's not because they bit me. It's because they're too dirty to eat." Hellion Vivian. Okay, she was wrong again. She should not have thought of a foodie as an ordinary person. To prevent the little one from saying something shocking again, Hellion Vivian quickly cut the potato chips as soon as they returned to the palace. Her knife skills were very good. The shredded potatoes were cut neatly. She wrapped them with flour and then put them in the oil pan. It was crispy and tender on the outside, fragrant and crunchy in the mouth. Her mouth was filled with the rich fragrance of potatoes, and there was also a layer of grape jam on the side, which was what the imperial kitchen used to make snacks. The little one was eating happily. His little body followed beside Hellion Vivian. He stared at the chopping board while eating potato chips. He looked adorable. Eunuch Sun watched from the side in disbelief. Wang Fei really has a way. In this way, Master will be much more relaxed. The little eunuch behind him was very perceptive. He handed a cup of tea to Eunuch Sunday. Eunuch Sun took it and drank a mouthful. Who said otherwise? In the past, when the royal family was busy, I had to chase after His Highness all over the palace. Now, there's someone who can cure him. Other than His Highness, he is only so obedient in front of Wang Fei. Even when he was in front of Headmaster Tu Su, he was not so worry-free. By the way, you also have to watch His Highness. Recently, the palace is in chaos. There are some places that you can't go. You must be on guard in advance. This palace, I'm afraid, is going to change. Yes. The little eunuch took the order and left. In the evening, in the hall, the lights were shining. A man in white stood, looking weak and elegant. The three elders have thought it through. Do you really want to lure the eminent monks into the palace? Even you said that this Hellion Vivian is very likely to be possessed by someone. One of the elders sneered. If she knows her place, it's fine. But if she keeps pushing us, we have no reason to let her go. We used to underestimate this girl. I didn't expect that she would do so many things in less than 2 months. Tu Su Feng brought her into the battle spirit forces and targeted us. Who knows what kind of methods she will use to deal with us in the future. That year, we gave face to her grandfather and spared her life. Now, it's time to cut the weeds and dig up the roots. The white-clothed man smiled. Elder Wu, do you really think that Hellion Vivian dealing with the 4 elders was Tu Su Feng's doing? What do you mean, young master? The other elders who were drinking tea paused. The white-clothed man turned around. His fair and handsome face revealed a sickly look. That year, the Hellion family was exterminated. Old Master Hellion died strangely. In the end, only Hellion Vivian was left. The reason why the various elders allowed her to stay was not because of Elder Hellion's face, but because of the Hellion blood in her body. It was said that the Hellion blood had the innate power of exorcism. Once someone possessed it, their martial chi would greatly increase. She is just a little girl. It's a pity to kill her. It's better to keep her as a blood bank. The elders did this, so they must have left behind some clues. Since I can find it, the current Hellion Vivian will definitely be able to find it as well. Therefore, it was not Tu Su Feng's idea to overthrow the elders. He would not do things with such a clear goal. The one who really wanted to get rid of the elders was Hellion Vivian herself. Then all the more reason to get rid of her. Elder Wu narrowed his eyes and put down the teacup in his hand. His eyes were filled with poisonous intent. The other 2 elders' faces also darkened. The incident that year was a grudge in their hearts. Once it was known by everyone, the image of the 4 elders protecting the Dragon War Empire for many years would be destroyed. Their supreme authority would also be affected. Therefore, Hellion Vivian must be eliminated. The man in white turned his back, lowered his eyes, and lightly coughed a few times. Hellion Wei's identity is not ordinary. It's not that easy to deal with her. How difficult it is to deal with that prince in the palace. I'm sure the three elders are clearer than me. How can you guarantee that the plan will be absolutely foolproof? Young master need not worry about this. Elder Wu took a sip of tea and smiled sinisterly. With the emperor's help, no matter how difficult it is to deal with the third prince, it will be useless. When the time comes, when the eminent monks start chanting, Hellion Vivian will definitely show her true form. The white-clothed man stopped his fingers and did not say anything else. Instead, the corner of his mouth curved into a mocking smile. When the sun had completely set and only Elder Ming was left in the hall, he opened his mouth again. When you enter the palace tomorrow, remember what I told you. Once the eminent monks finish chanting, regardless of whether Elder Wu succeeds or not, you must lure Hellion Vivian to the riverside. Master, I will naturally accomplish what you said. Elder Ming's posture was very strange. His head was drooping and his mouth was letting out a hoarse laugh. The white-clothed man faintly glanced at him. You have been a human for so many days, but you still can't learn the habits of a human. Remember, no matter what, you must not reveal the slightest clue. Especially your sitting and standing posture. If there is even the slightest mistake, you know what the result will be. Chapter 540. Master, don't worry. I'm only acting like this in front of you. It's normal in front of others. Elder Ming stuck out his tongue and licked his hand. His entire body was filled with demonic aura. It's just that wearing this skin is really uncomfortable. I'm afraid that I won't be able to control myself and will want to eat people when those monks start chanting. Hearing this, the man in white raised his finger and an invisible talisman appeared on Elder Ming's body. With this talisman, no matter how those monks chant, they won't be able to affect you. Master has a way. Elder Ming straightened his neck, but he was still a little afraid. Beligaju. The man in white looked at him. The more you care, the more you lose your usual shrewdness. Elder Wu, since you're dealing with Hellion Vivian, Beligaju will definitely try his best to protect Hellion Vivian's soul and neglect you instead. I want you to take advantage of this gap to do everything. Go, bring Hellion Vivian to me. With her blood, the divine exorcism seal can be completely activated. Yes. Elder Ming grinned. His eyes gradually turned blood red in the gloomy darkness. Outside the main hall, Elder Jean looked back. The more he thought about it, the stranger he felt. He decided to voice out his doubts. Elder Wu, don't you think that young master seemed to be holding back when he spoke to us this time? Elder Wu's eyes darkened as he looked to the west. Young master has always been mysterious. This is nothing. But this time, we can't simply force Hellion Wei's soul out of her body and call it a day. The third prince has cut off all the benefits in the provincial capital. If this goes on, think about it carefully. What will happen to you and me when he takes the throne one day? If we investigate the fire in the palace back then, both of us won't be able to escape. What do you mean, Elder Wu? Elder Wu's voice turned cold. Drag the third prince down as well. With the retired emperor's protection, the third prince won't be dragged down so easily. For these elders to be able to sit in their current positions, each one of them had their own wisdom. Elder Jean naturally had his own ideas. Elder Wu chuckled and lowered his voice. What if the emperor wants the third prince to die? You want to use the Hellion Vivian incident to pin the crime of treason on the third prince. Elder Jean quickly understood what his colleague meant, but he still felt that it was inappropriate. It's not that easy. Elder Wu turned around and looked at him. Everything depends on the person. The third prince married a possessed person into the palace. This itself is a great taboo of the royal family. In addition to his actions during this period, I'm afraid it would be difficult for the emperor to tolerate him even if he wanted to. All these years, His Majesty has always been like us, wanting to live forever. For this reason, he has been addicted to pills. Others might not understand his true intentions, but how could Elder Jean not understand? He doesn't want to be like the retired emperor, handing over his power to others when he's old. Now that the third prince has performed so well, and the fifth prince and the empress are no longer around, there's no one to help him maintain the balance in the court. According to His Majesty's character, it's hard for him not to want to make a move on the third prince, just like how he acquiesced to us attacking the Hellion family. Elder Wu said the last sentence very slowly. So slowly that Elder Zhon's eyes darkened. What do you want to do? Elder Wu knew that he had agreed. He leaned over and whispered something in a low voice. After hearing this, Elder Zhon nodded slightly and praised, "You're indeed Elder Wu, to be able to come up with such a beautiful plan. His Majesty hasn't been peaceful these past few days." Once the provincial capital's matter is settled, many officials have begun to clamor for the third prince to be the official crown prince. How do you think he can sleep peacefully? Elder Wu laughed as if victory was already in his hands. Now that the fifth prince has been deposed and the empress is imprisoned in the cold palace, it's normal for a prince without any power to make a last stand. It's normal for him to bring soldiers into the palace to force the emperor to abdicate. When that time comes, the third prince will definitely use his power in the military to protect the palace. However, the situation is different now. Since His Majesty already has the intention to get rid of him, then he can be the one to protect the palace, but not the third prince. Once the third prince makes a move, my men will directly sneak into his palace to hide the dragon robe. When that time comes, His Majesty can completely say that the third prince is the one with the true intention of rebelling. Elder Zhon stroked his beard. What if the third prince doesn't move a single soldier? He's an extremely profound person. After so many years, I've never been able to see through him. Although the plan this time is perfect, it's a little rushed. It's not impossible for him to see through the knack of it. If he doesn't move a single soldier and just stands in the imperial court without moving at all or giving orders, then this matter will be even easier to handle. Elder Wu was full of pride. Once I get my hands on it, I'll directly point out in the imperial court that these so-called rebel soldiers are merely using the fifth prince's name. In fact, the third prince is the one who's actually forcing the emperor to abdicate. Otherwise, why wouldn't he move a single soldier to protect the emperor? Elder Zhon gave a thumbs up as he listened. This plan is beyond words. If he moves, then he's plotting a rebellion. If he doesn't move, then he's plotting something. Unless there's someone who can help him block this attempt to force the emperor to abdicate, otherwise, His Majesty will definitely be ruthless to the third prince this time. That's right. Elder Wu smiled sinisterly. Elder Zhon thought for a moment and said, if we want this to be foolproof, it's best to first pin Hellion Vivian's crime on the head. This way, the third prince will be too busy to think of anything else. Rest assured, Elder Zhon. Elder Wu smiled. On the day of the wedding, Hellion Vivian did not make a fool of herself because of the appearance of the fire Chelene. During the chanting of the scriptures tomorrow, whether it's you, me, or her and the third prince, all of us will have to stay in the palace. With His Majesty around, no one will be allowed to bring any spiritual beasts in. When that time comes, Hellion Vivian will have no choice but to die. Clatter. The emperor sneered and threw the memorial in his hand to one side. His voice was clearly filled with anger. Another memorial that's forcing me to appoint the crown prince as soon as possible. Heh, I'm still on the throne and they're already so bold. Crash. All the memorials on the sandalwood table were swept to the ground by the emperor's sleeve. Eunuch Gao, who was serving the emperor, was so frightened that he trembled. The emperor could not stand anyone now, what more a servant? He kicked the eunuch to vent his anger. The retired emperor is also a muddle-headed old man. Instead of doting on his son, he chose to dote on his grandson. Chapter 541. The Crown Prince. The emperor laughed gloomily. Without my approval, he will never be the crown prince in his life. Chaoyang Hall was destined to be restless tonight. Eunuch Gao dragged his aching body. No one could understand the grievance in his heart. He had been by the emperor's side for 30 years, but he was worse than a beast. In my opinion, the emperor can't bear it anymore. Nangong Lai, who had been staying in the temple of ancestral worship all this time, directly told Beligaju after receiving the news, Ju, I always feel that there must be something behind this. You should be careful these days. Even though the emperor has been obsessed with alchemy all these years, the palace is still his after all. Beligaju sat on the wooden chair with his legs slightly crossed. His handsome side profile was as cold as ice. Nangong Lai didn't say much. After all, He knew Belagaju best. When he was young, Arju was not liked by the Empress. Now that he had grown up, even the Emperor was wary of him. Nangong Lai shook his head and sighed in his heart. When he left, it was already late at night. Bailey Jiaoju was shrouded in the night fog as he returned to the palace. The servants below could almost see the coldness in his eyes. One after another, they bowed their heads and served him on his left and right. When he approached the dragon bed, there was finally some warmth in his long and narrow eyes. It was not because of anything else, but because of the person lying in the cage. Her wrists were locked by an iron chain. She slept peacefully, with one side empty, as if deliberately left a space for him. If it were anyone else, they would have been unable to stand him being locked in such a cage. Except for her. Belagaju felt something warm in his chest. He leaned over and took the only person he had into his arms. Hellion Vivian, who was sleeping, was very docile. She leaned over according to Belagaju's intention, and even put her arm naturally on Hellion Vivian's waist. Belagaju curved his thin lips and kissed her on the top of her head. Now, she was completely defenseless against him. Previously, in order to obtain this person, he did not hesitate to go against his style of doing things and set up that marriage contract, just to get her into bed with him. When they first got married, she was still distant from him. Even when the two of them were lying together, she would stick close to the wall, afraid to touch him. Now, she was so obedient that he couldn't bear to part with her. That was why one had to be patient and skillful in rearing a cunning prey like a fox. Oh! Wei Wei was moved by the cold aura of his body. That exposed part of the fair skin on her abdomen, which was still rising and falling slightly along with her breathing, was like a defenseless little beast. Is it daybreak? Bailey Jiaoju was indeed a qualified breeder. He stretched out his hand and pulled her over again. He patted her back and said in a deep and pleasant voice that sounded like a pre-recorded lullaby, "Not yet. Go back to sleep. Then wake me up when the sun rises. I want to make beans for you." She basically murmured the last few words. Belagaju looked at her. Even his usually thin lips had some lingering gentleness. The moonlight shone through the wooden window and shone on the two people sleeping in each other's arms. It was an indescribable combination. Achoo! She didn't know if it was because she had woken up too early, but Hellion Vivian sneezed as soon as she got out of bed. Her foot missed and kicked the head of the bed, hurting herself. Belagaju was standing by the window with a fur-colored towel in his hand. When he heard the noise, he looked over. When he turned to look at Hellion Vivian, the lines of his neck were stretched and there was a strong sense of abstinence. "Come here." Hellion Vivian subconsciously swallowed her saliva and looked to the other side. "What are you doing?" "Looking at your feet," Belagaju said as he handed the towel to the servant beside him. Hellion Vivian nodded. Just as she was about to bend down to put on her shoes, someone grabbed her waist and easily pulled her up. When she reacted, she was already in the air and sitting on the sandalwood dressing table. Belagaju's hands were on both sides of her. He lowered his body, and his beautiful long and narrow eyes were at the same level as Hellion Vivian's. His voice was deep. "Lift your feet." In this position, Hellion Vivian obviously wouldn't lift her feet. She just looked at him and said, "It doesn't hurt. It's just a touch. It's red from a touch." Belagaju moved closer and almost forced her into a corner. His presence was so strong that Hellion Vivian couldn't ignore it. She didn't know if it was because of the morning light shining on his face, but it made his face look more handsome and three-dimensional. Hellion Vivian thought to herself that she finally saw what it meant to have a natural flash effect. His Highness was a monster no matter where he was. "You're looking at me like this. Do you want me to continue what I did last night?" Belagaju chuckled and moved closer to her ear. His voice was very long. Hellion Vivian's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to push him away, but he pushed her back. Belagaju turned his face slightly and leaned towards Hellion Vivian. The closer his eyes were, the more her heart beat. Hellion Wei's fingers clutched her clothes and subconsciously leaned back. "Wait a minute. Tchem." Belagaju didn't seem to give her a chance to escape. His right hand was free, and he skillfully held the back of her head. His thin lips pressed against hers. The slightly cold touch and the familiar sandalwood smell were very intoxicating. Hellion Vivian gasped for breath. Her entire body was in his embrace. When the kiss landed on her neck, she reached out to stop him. "No, I still have to make a basket of bin paste buns for you and Xiao Qi. He'll wake up later, and you can eat them together. Don't you like bin paste? It can warm your stomach." Hearing this, Belagaju's fingers loosened. He looked at the bright and beautiful little face in front of him and couldn't help but be stunned. When did he say that he liked bin paste? She was acting on her own again. Although she said so, the indifferent royal prince ate more than anyone else after receiving the bin paste buns. It was enough to show that the bin paste buns were to his liking. The rest of the food was taken away by little Seven. He held a chopstick in his hand and another in his mouth. He sat in front of Hellion Wei Wei and Bailey Jiuju in a dignified manner. He held a pair of chopsticks in his left hand and sat in a domineering manner. Eunuch Sun took advantage of this time to mention to Belagaju the ministers who wanted to come in recently. He wanted to let His Highness see more of them. It would be helpful in the future. Belagaju looked at the residue on Xiao Qi's face and frowned. His tone was as indifferent as usual. "Reject them all." Eunuch Sun was stunned and whispered, "But the Ministry of War is also among them." Chapter 542. Reject it. Belagaju glanced at him and wiped his fingers with a white handkerchief. He didn't explain further. Eunuch Sun's head drooped even lower as he looked at Hellion Vivian. He probably wanted Hellion Vivian to persuade him. After all, if he didn't see anyone, he wouldn't be able to do well in the court. Wasn't His Highness very smart in the past? Why couldn't he understand this time? Eunuch Sun waited anxiously and gestured with his mouth. Hellion Vivian stood up. While taking the bowl, she smiled at him. Eunuch Sun is really loyal to His Highness. You even made a face. Wang Fei, don't make fun of us. Eunuch Sun tapped his foot and looked inside. His Highness won't see anyone. What should we do in the future? Hellion Vivian sniffed the bin paste bun in her hand and said in a very soft voice, Eunuch Sun, do you think His Highness should see these officials now? The situation isn't right. Eunuch Sun paused. The situation isn't right? After we came back from the provincial capital, whether it was the Ministry of Appointments or the Ministry of War, they all said that they want the Emperor to appoint His Highness as the heir apparent as soon as possible. It's been 4 or 5 days, but the Emperor hasn't made a move. The corners of Hellion Wei Wei's mouth carried a smile as she took a bite of that steaming hot red bean bun. This only proves one thing. The Emperor doesn't want to appoint an heir apparent so early. If His Highness goes to make friends with the officials of the Ministry of Appointments and the Ministry of Defense at this time, he will be inviting trouble for himself. Naturally, it's better not to see these people. It will also prevent the Emperor from thinking too much. When Eunuch Sun heard Hellion Vivian's words, a layer of cold sweat immediately appeared on his forehead. Wang Fei means that the Emperor has already started to. I don't mean anything. Hellion Vivian picked another apple from the basket and spun in a circle, but I think His Highness just doesn't want to see them. If he wanted to see them, he wouldn't care about these things. The closer she got to Belagaju, the more Hellion Vivian knew that the outside world's sanctity was fake. The real him was afraid of dirtying his hands with blood. People said that he was ruthless. But in Hellion Vivian's eyes, he was a little prince without a childhood. Although he had some tricks up his sleeve, she liked him very much. If he didn't have any means to protect himself, wouldn't he be waiting for death in a place like the Imperial Palace? What's more, how could he be blamed for this? Even the Emperor couldn't tolerate him, let alone other people. Third sister-in-law, what are you talking about with Eunuch Sun? The little one lifted his head with a bean bun in his mouth. Belagaju followed his gaze and looked at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian smiled and raised the apple in her hand. I'll ask Eunuch Sun to be careful. The next time he comes, he'll bring more fruit. I can make fruit yogurt for you and your third brother. Fruit yogurt? The little one nodded with a serious face. Not bad, it sounded delicious. Hellion Vivian was amused by his little adult appearance. She patted his head and sat back beside Belagaju. Belagaju looked at her indifferently. So, Eunuch's son will definitely be more careful in the future. What the princess said, what the prince wants, this old servant will definitely be more careful. Eunuch's son was smart. After a while, he went out and sent everyone away. His words were good, neither unfamiliar nor friendly. Belegaju naturally knew what the two of them were talking about. He looked down at the little one who was picking snacks and dried fruits for him. A faint smile appeared on his thin lips. Helene Vivian happened to see that smile. She looked at the dried mango in her hand in confusion and asked blankly, "You like to eat this? Then I'll leave it to you in the future." Millimeter. Belegaju pulled her over, raised her hand, and kissed it. This silly fox, he had to watch over her no matter what. Helene Vivian smiled brightly and let him kiss her. She looked very naughty. "Do you find that I'm good to you? Don't always lock me up in the future. Let me lock you up too. Okay. Then I can be more good to you." "Wait, what did you just say?" Helene Vivian suspected that there was something wrong with her ears. Belegaju reached out and held her waist. His voice was charming. "Come back tonight. I'll let you lock me up for a night. How about that? So easy to talk to." Helene Vivian slowly narrowed her eyes. Bailey Georgiou curled his lips into a faint smile. "Isn't it to make you treat me better? I want twice as many locks as usual." In order to prevent him from playing tricks, it had to be like this. For Helene Vivian, this was an opportunity no matter what. To be honest, a man like Belegaju, any woman who saw his restrained and cold appearance would want to lock him up. This man was very suitable for dark things. For example, handcuffs, or guns that could kill people. Helene Vivian had wanted to tie him up for a long time. As the queen of firearms, it was rare to see such a suitable man to tie up, so her hands were very itchy. Unfortunately, the difference in strength between her and the enemy was too great. In terms of insidiousness, she couldn't compare to a certain highness. Now that he took the initiative to deliver himself to her, of course she couldn't refuse. Thinking of this, Helene Vivian happily began to plan what kind of lock to use to lock up the most handsome man in the world at night. Only then would she be able to fully display his porcelain-like exquisite beauty. She didn't even notice the smile on her face. Belegaju put his slender fingers on her head and couldn't help but smile again. She was only tied up once, and she was so happy. It was really easy to get rid of. "Your Highness." As if he had something to report, Shadow walked in from outside. When he saw Helene Vivian and Little Seven, he had a hesitant expression on his face. Helene Vivian knew that they were going to talk about business, so she called Little Seven over. "Let's go, we're going outside to get some sun." Little Seven reached out his hand and pulled on Helene Vivian's sleeve. Belegaju said in a faint voice, "Wait for Shadow to finish his report, then we'll go out together." Helene Vivian looked back and smiled. Okay. She had always felt that there were some things that he didn't want her to know. Why was it an exception this time? In fact, there was no exception this time. Shadow's report was undoubtedly bloody. For Belegaju, he didn't want her to see the things that anyone could see. But on the other hand, he desperately wanted her to know that he was that kind of person. He would do anything, and his hands were stained with blood. "Your Highness." This was the first time Shadow saw such an expression on His Highness's face. He hesitated whether he should say it or not. Belegaju's handsome face was indifferent, and his voice was emotionless. "Say it." "Yes." Shadow lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, "The few eminent monks that the elders found have all been dealt with. According to your Highness's instructions, none of them were left alive." When Helene Vivian heard this, she glanced at Belegaju. "You had people kill those monks who entered the palace to chant scriptures?" Belegaju's hand that was hidden in his sleeve tightened. His slightly cold voice carried a hint of self-mockery. "What? Do you think that this highness is too cruel?" Chapter 543. Helene Vivian was silent for a while before she said, "Wouldn't it be more sinful to kill these monks?" "So what?" Belegaju clenched his cold fingers. He regretted asking Anying to speak. Wasn't it obvious? He looked perfect on the surface. In fact, He didn't know how to do anything other than killing people and scheming. There was no need to differentiate between sinful and not sinful. If it was in the past, he would directly go to the temple where these monks came from and slaughter them. But now, it's nothing. Hellion Vivian chuckled and interrupted his thoughts. I just feel that I should go to the hidden spirit temple again and burn some incense for you. As she spoke, she raised her eyes and hooked her arm around Bailey Georgiou's. She smiled at him and said, "Next time, leave this kind of thing to me. Your hands are so beautiful, don't get them stained with blood. Besides, those monks originally came for me. They came to the palace to quell the chaos. If you kill them, how are you going to explain it to the emperor? Is this what you want to say?" Belagajou's deep eyes seemed to be stirred up by layers of ripples. It was different from the usual cold, deep heat. He didn't believe it before. But now, he believed it. In this world, there would always be a person who could make you forgive all the hardships you have suffered. For him, Hellion Vivian was that existence. Hellion Vivian nodded. Is it wrong to say this? That's right. Bailey Georgiou smiled slowly. He leaned over and kissed her on the lips. This kiss came too suddenly. Hellion Vivian suddenly froze on the spot. Her nose was full of the man's unique mint smell. Her heart beat a little faster. There were so many people around. In addition to Little Seven, there was also Eunuch's son and An Ying. Hellion Vivian just tasted that charming and slightly cold sandalwood scent. She reached out and pushed him away. The tips of her ears were red. Can you pay attention to your image a little? Who asked you to seduce me? Belagajou snickered. When other people hear Shadow's report, they would always label me as the devil. But you, on the other hand, are protecting a devil like me. Hellion Vivian wiped the blush from his kiss. She didn't even raise her head and directly replied, "If I don't protect you, who will I protect? You are my man." Oh. Belagajou curved his thin lips and picked her up. Then I'll have to trouble madam. Hellion Vivian shrugged. That's nothing, but killing a few monks shouldn't solve anything. Wang Fei is wise. An Ying coughed twice and finally found his voice. This time, the House of Elders has put in a lot of effort. They invited 3 groups of eminent monks in a row. We only killed the first group. Although we didn't leave any traces, it will be difficult to do it again. After all, it was the emperor's idea to invite the eminent monks into the palace. Hellion Vivian nodded. Tell An Ying to come back. There's no need to kill those eminent monks. But An Ying looked at Belagajou. Belagajou's slender fingers carelessly twirled Hellion Vivian's hair and nodded without a trace. Only then did An Ying reply, "Yes. You're in such a hurry, it shouldn't be just for this matter, right?" Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and smiled. Tell me all about it. I'm actually quite interested in His Highness' affairs. An Ying looked at Belagajou again and said, The informant from the Ministry of War has sent news. The Empress's former subordinates have been restless recently. Today, they even gathered together. I don't know what they want to do. The Empress's former subordinates? Hellion Vivian's eyes narrowed and her voice sank. Even if she was a transmigrator, she knew that something was about to happen. The most likely thing was that they were plotting a rebellion. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused for a moment. Then, she stood up. However, Bailey Georgiou only listened quietly. There was not a single ripple on his handsome face. An Ying tentatively asked, Your Highness, shouldn't we make some preparations? First, we should transfer the garrison outside the city to wait outside the Meridian Gate. No need. Belagajou reached out and put down the teacup in his hand. His voice was faint. Go and investigate who organized the Empress's former subordinates. The 5th prince is under house arrest, the Empress is locked up in the palace, and the Murong clan has long been disbanded. Now that they've come out to make trouble, no matter how you look at it, there's a problem. An Ying responded with a yes, but he was still worried. Your Highness, since there's a problem, then they must have come prepared. Is it really okay if we don't transfer the garrison? At this time, we can't transfer the garrison. Bailey Georgiou's voice was very flat, as if this matter had nothing to do with him at all. The troops stationed in the city are supposed to protect the safety of the capital. They should be obeying the Emperor's orders. If I really have the ability to touch them, even if I helped Imperial Father block the rebels who tried to force the abdication, Imperial Father would still blame me for this matter. He might even directly pin the crime of rebellion on me because a prince shouldn't have led the troops into the palace. And Ying was dumbfounded. The Emperor won't do this, right? Why wouldn't he? He's just taking advantage of the situation. Beligaju slowly turned his sleeves. And Ying was anxious. Then Your Highness, what should we do? We can't just watch those people kill their way into the palace, right? At that time, won't the Emperor say that you didn't do anything? It's more than just not doing anything. Beligaju curved his thin lips. All right, you can leave now. I have a way to deal with this matter. Tell all the shadow guards, no matter what happens, don't move. And Ying didn't say anything else, but don't move. Is this really okay? Time passed by little by little. Unlike the peace in the palace, the sound of the wind blowing through the grass outside the palace was especially loud. In a secret tea house in the west of the city, where few people came and went, a few shadows gathered and were secretly plotting something. The general with the sword pointed at a scroll of the palace's inner courtyard and lowered his voice. When the sky turns dark, someone will open this door for us in advance. At that time, we just need to quietly go in and directly approach the Chaoyang Palace. We can only succeed, we can't fail. Yes. This was their only chance. The Murong clan had lost their leader, and the Empress was suppressed in the cold palace. The Emperor didn't care about their excessive friendship, and the third prince wanted to kill them all. So, they had to do this. According to the elders' plan, even if they didn't succeed in forcing the third prince to abdicate. As long as the third prince sent his army to stop them, the Emperor would definitely not tolerate him and add the crime of rebellion to his name. It was worth it to drag the third prince down with them. Chapter 544. At noon, the eminent monk entered the palace. The three grand elders were by his side. They were there to appease the souls of the dead and purge the evil in the palace. Elder. When they entered the palace, the guard who received the palanquin went up to Elder Wu and whispered something to him. Others could not hear it clearly, but Elder Wu heard it clearly. He nodded with a smile on his face and walked to a dark corner. His eyes were filled with venom. He would like to see how Beligaju would deal with this. All these years, the Elder compound had always been restricted. Every time they did something, they had to consider Beligaju's counterattack. Now that there was such a great opportunity, they might as well get rid of him while the Emperor was distracted. They would like to see how he would bite them without his status as a prince. Elder Wu. Eunuch Gao stood at the entrance of the palace. He was here to receive the guests on behalf of the Emperor. Only then did Elder Wu come back to his senses. He smiled calmly. Eunuch Gao, is everyone here? We can't leave anyone out. The masters said that the evil aura in the palace is too strong recently. If we don't get rid of the evil aura for the concubines and highnesses, I'm afraid we won't have peace. Don't worry, Elder. The concubines and highnesses will be here as long as His Majesty gives the order. Eunuch Gao replied with a smile, it's just that it's still early, and it's not time yet. In a while, the hall will be lively. Elder Wu nodded. When he looked down, the corner of his lips curled up slightly. He thought to himself gloomily, Hellion Vivian, no matter how capable you are this time, I'm afraid you'll have to stay in this palace for an hour and be tortured by the scriptures. I reckon you'll show your true colors in less than an hour. The sound of the blessing music slowly rang out. Unlike the past, this time, the music focused on peace and harmony. Beligaju gently twisted the jade pendant on his waist. His eyes were looking at the cloudless sky. His handsome side profile was as cold as a glacier. Have you found out? Yes, Shadow said softly, it's the Elder compound's idea, but... Beligaju raised his eyebrows. But what? I don't understand. How are they going to break in? And Ying's head was very low. Looking around, there were countless big and small palaces in the Imperial Palace. It would not be easy to break in. Bailey Jiaju smiled casually. How do we break in? Of course, it's a collaboration between the inside and the outside. Otherwise, It would be hard for the emperor to accuse me of plotting a rebellion. This. And Ying didn't know what to say. Since ancient times, even a vicious tiger wouldn't eat its own cubs. But in the imperial family, this was unavoidable. Beligaju put down the jade pendant he was fiddling with in his hand and quietly looked back. With an imposing manner that could change the weather with a flip of his hand, he said, "No matter what method they use, as long as the palace gate of Chaoyang Palace is not broken, you don't have to show up. Let them kill for fun. Since the emperor doesn't want me to move, then you don't have to rush to protect me." During this period of time, His Majesty has been muddle-headed. It just so happens that seeing some blood will also wake him up. After listening to Beligaju's words, Shadow finally understood what His Highness meant. If they didn't make a move, the ones who died were either the rebels or the Emperor's Imperial Guards. Anyway, they wouldn't be the ones who suffered losses. By the time those rebels really killed their way to Chaoyang Palace, they would have used up most of their strength. By that time, when they appeared again, they could simply clean up and solve this matter. It was undeniable that His Highness's idea this time was too insidious. Those elders definitely didn't expect His Highness to use this trick. Moreover, the ones who would send the troops would not be the Imperial Guards who could be used as excuses by them. "Your Highness." From afar, Qingzhon hurried over and even forgot to salute. Chaoyang Palace sent a message saying that everyone in the Imperial Harem has to participate in the eminent monk's recitation of Buddha. Even the princes and princesses can't avoid it. The princess has been brought to Chaoyang Palace by the people over there. I saw that the princess didn't look good. I was afraid that something bad would happen, so I took the initiative to inform Your Highness. "Please, Your Highness." Before Qingzhon could finish her words, she felt a piercing cold wind blowing past her face. When she looked up again, Beligaju was no longer in front of her. Beligaju slowly clenched his fists as his long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Even his deep eyes that were usually calm were overflowing with a chilling coldness. "How dare they?" Swoosh. Beligaju reached out and brushed away the light fur cloak that was handed to him by the servant. His slender figure was as fast as a shadow. There was no anxious expression on his face, but his eyes were faintly overflowing with an unusual light. In the darkness, it seemed like something fell. The strands of hair in front of his forehead successfully covered his eyes, so that no one could see the deep demonic nature. However, the smile on his sickly pale handsome face was so elegant and bloodthirsty. If his precious prey was harmed, he would make all of them regret being born into this world. "Elder Ming. What's wrong with you, Elder Ming?" Elder Wu looked at his colleague who was trembling beside him and frowned in confusion. The elder surnamed Ming tried his best to control the reaction in his blood. He shrunk his arm and hid his black fingernails under his long sleeve. He gave a fake smile and said, "It's nothing. It's just that my body hasn't been feeling well recently. I can't stand the wind." "What was that wave just now? What was it?" Elder Ming's expression was uncertain. He lowered his eyes and covered the red light that was overflowing from his eyes. Elder Wu did not notice his abnormality. He only replied, "Then Elder Ming should be careful." After that, he retracted his gaze and looked at Elder Zhon. Elder Zhon nodded at him subtly and guided him to look at Hellion Vivian who was walking in. Elder Wu laughed. His voice was not very loud, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Why is the third princess consort unwilling to come to the main hall? Is there something that you don't want the eminent monks to know?" "You, shut up." Before Hellion Vivian could speak, Little Seven blocked Elder Wu with a cool expression. That innate domineering aura actually caused Elder Wu to involuntarily take a step back. "What can I not want the eminent monks to know?" Hellion Vivian held Little Seven's hand and asked with a light smile, "Elder Wu's arrangement is strange. The recent cases in the Imperial Palace have all happened by the river. Elder Wu did not let the eminent monks go to the river to chant sutras and Buddha, but called us all to the main hall. Is there something that you want to do?" Elder Wu had always been a thoughtful person. When he heard Hellion Vivian's words, his expression did not change at all. His pure white robe looked just as usual, chanting sutras and Buddha in Chaoyang Hall to expel the bad luck from the imperial consort's body is the consideration of the eminent monks. This is to prevent any evil from entering the inner palace. It's just chanting sutras with the eminent monks for an hour, yet the princess consort is so against it. It's easy for others to think too much. This old man has to ask, is there something that the princess consort does not want people to know? Chapter 545. Ever since I came in, Elder Wu has been saying that I'm hiding something. Hellion Vivian brushed the dust off her fingertips and said calmly, Elder Wu, do you have any evidence? Hearing this, Elder Wu slowly narrowed his eyes. Sure enough, he could not underestimate this girl anymore. Not only was she eloquent, but she also knew how to avoid the important and dwell on the trivial. However, her methods were fine for dealing with matters in the residence, but if she wanted to compete with him in the main hall, she was simply courting death. Elder Wu slowly opened his mouth. I don't have any evidence, but I've always had a doubt in my heart. Everyone in the capital city is spreading rumors that since the princess consort fell into the river, her temperament has changed drastically. She is no longer as arrogant and despotic as before. Even the things that you create are amazing. It's as if your soul has been taken away by some evil spirit. How do you explain this, princess consort? What does Elder Wu want me to explain? Hellion Vivian smiled. It's because I'm too arrogant and despotic that I've become a joke for 7 years. When grandfather passed away, although I was still young, I didn't forget the ancestral teachings of the Hellion family. The Hellion family has never produced cowards. If Elder Wu wants to see my arrogant and despotic side, then it's hard to say. As long as the emperor agrees, I can beat you until your head is full of blood. As for the things that I create, you should ask my teacher, Grandmaster Jizun. He has taught me too well, so it's hard for some people to find fault with me. The princess consort is really good at talking. Elder Wu narrowed his eyes and clenched his fists. Hellion Vivian smiled calmly. Elder Wu is too kind, I'm just a little arrogant and despotic. You. Elder Wu clenched his fists and released them. A smile appeared on his face. I didn't believe in this matter at first, but after seeing the princess consort's attitude, I started to have doubts. Since the princess consort said so, why don't you just agree to recite the scriptures? This way, you can prove the princess consort's innocence. Hellion Vivian paused for a moment, but before she could say anything, Minister Wu is right. The emperor, who was sitting on the main seat, opened his mouth in a deep voice. Perhaps it was because he had been taking pills for a long time, but his complexion looked worse than the average person. The bags under his eyes were extremely heavy, and his hair was jet black. He especially looked like a drug addict from the modern era. It's just an hour of chanting Buddhist scriptures with an eminent monk. If you continue to refuse, the taste will change. This was a special time, so Hellion Vivian naturally wouldn't disobey the emperor's orders. She glanced sideways at Elder Wu before speaking to the emperor. Since your majesty has given the order, Wei naturally wouldn't dare to refuse. However, Elder Wu doesn't have the slightest evidence, yet you claim that Wei's soul was taken away by some evil creature. Isn't that too overbearing? Wang Fei, please don't dislike this old man's attitude. Possession is not a normal matter. If everything is normal with Wang Fei, when this matter is over, this old man will personally apologize to you. When Elder Wu saw that Hellion Vivian's words were getting weaker and weaker, his eyes were filled with pride. Princess consort, please. Hellion Vivian's clear eyes darkened. The little one held the bean paste bun in his mouth and looked left and right. Just as he was about to start fighting, Hellion Vivian stopped him. If Wang Fei still doesn't move, there will be a real problem. When Elder Wu's voice fell, many people were already looking in their direction. There was a faint fear in their eyes. I heard that the person who possessed the body likes to suck blood the most. Look at those palace maids who died in the imperial palace, didn't they all have their blood sucked dry? Do you mean that Hellion Vivian is really? Who knows? We'll only know when the eminent monks recite the scriptures later. Hellion Vivian held the little one's hand and took a step forward. She then knelt on the spot that belonged to her third sister-in-law. The little one held the bean paste bun in his hand in a dignified manner. Have a bite of the bean paste bun first. Don't worry, I promised third brother that I'll protect you. Hellion Vivian smiled and pinched his bun face. I'm not worried. With Xiao Qi around, what's there to worry about? I'll pass on your words to third brother. The little one took out another bean paste bun from his chest. While his third brother was not around, he asked very seriously, third sister-in-law, to be honest, am I more handsome and awesome than third brother? Hellion Vivian held back her laughter. What do you mean? Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked me to dance all the time. He's just jealous that I'm more handsome than him. The little one took a bite of the bean paste bun angrily. Hellion Vivian felt more and more that these two brothers were naturally arrogant. She reached out her hand to stroke their fur. Then, she heard countless scripture chants in the palace. She couldn't be more familiar with that mantra. Again and again, it drilled into her ears. Elder Wu watched this scene with a vicious gaze. She would not be able to hold on much longer. Calculating the time, the third prince and the retired emperor should be arriving soon. He really wanted to see the expressions on those two people's faces if they knew that the third princess consort that they had carefully selected was an evil being who had been possessed. However, Elder Wu's smile did not last for more than a minute. Beligaju, who was strolling in from outside, grabbed his neck immediately. Beligaju was too fast. He was so fast that no one was prepared for it. All they could see was a shadow flashing past their eyes. When Elder Wu came back to his senses, he realized that his whole body was lifted up. Your Highness. Cough cough. What are you doing? Elder Wu tried his best to breathe, but he could not get rid of the fear in his heart. That feeling of suffocation made him disregard his image and shout at the emperor, Your Majesty. Please save this old official. The emperor's face showed his displeasure. Third brother. Put Elder Wu down. I can put him down if you want. Beligaju smiled faintly. He looked gentle, but he gave off a bloodthirsty aura. He has to give me an explanation for slandering my people. Elder Wu, you're just an elder at most. You're supposed to be a subordinate who shares the burden of the imperial family. What right do you have to threaten a princess consort? Of course, Elder Wu knew how difficult it was to deal with this person. He was not afraid of the emperor at all. He might really be strangled to death by him. No, he must think of a way. Elder Wu's eyes turned and he tiptoed. His face started to turn green and he kept coughing. I promised the princess consort. Cough cough. If the princess consort is not possessed, I will apologize to the princess consort. Cough. Don't you want to know if the princess consort is really possessed? Chapter 546. I'm not interested in your speculations. Beligaju turned around and glanced at the little one beside Hellion Vivian. His eyes darkened and his voice slowed down. He let go of Elder Wu and slowly tied at his robes. However, since the princess consort has promised you, I'd like to see what's going on with this preposterous idea of possession. Preposterous? Elder Wu clutched his neck and coughed violently. He thought to himself, when you see the shadow of a demon appearing behind Hellion Vivian, you won't find it preposterous anymore. Go and tell the eminent monks to chant louder. Yes. In an instant, the Buddhist chants in the hall became louder. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. She held Xiao Qi and sat steadily. Elder Wu looked at her straightened back and laughed coldly in his heart. I'd like to see how long she can hold on. As for the third prince who was standing next to him, it was time for him, the god's favored one, to have a taste of being slapped in the face. No matter what, he was still an elder. The third prince did not give him any face at all. Just wait and see. Once I'm done with Hellion Vivian, the next person I'll deal with is Beligaju. Your Highness, you'd better watch carefully. Elder Wu smiled and looked as if he was thinking for Beligaju. Usually, a person who possesses a body will sweat profusely and a black shadow will appear behind them. Although we can't catch the black shadow, we can still see it with our eyes. Your Highness, don't be distracted and miss out on any interesting scenes. Beligaju raised his eyes and looked at him slowly. That look was extremely cold. It was so cold that Elder Wu's scalp went numb. Then, he heard the person speak calmly. If there's no interesting scene to watch, I'll use Elder Wu's head as an example. It was just a few words, but it seemed to have lowered the temperature of the surroundings by a few degrees. Hearing this, Elder Wu narrowed his eyes even more. He knew from the beginning that no matter who was the emperor, the 4 great elders of the Elder compound would always have the power that others could not have, and they would be loved and respected by the people. Only this 3rd prince, who did not listen to reason or force, would one day destroy everything they had. That was why he made such a huge decision today. It's almost time now. Elder Wu strolled toward Helian Wei. Noticing the beads of sweat on her forehead, the smile on his face deepened. Princess Consort, don't force yourself. Not even half of the time has passed. If you're really uncomfortable, why don't you say it yourself? You'll be punished anyway, why don't you let yourself suffer less? Elder Wu, where did you see that I'm? Helian Vivian smiled gently as she pinched Xiao Qi's hand. I heard the Buddha's voice and was chanting along. I took the opportunity to pray for His Highness and sweat a little. Elder Wu, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. I hope that the Princess Consort is right. You're only sweating a little. Princess Consort, you'll have to wait patiently. In less than an hour, the eminent monk's Buddhist teachings will not end. I'm really worried that the Princess Consort won't be able to take it. Elder Wu stood up again with a smile on his face and asked the monks to increase the volume of the chanting. In his heart, Helian Vivian was already at the end of her rope. She was like a grasshopper who was about to die and wanted to jump a few more times. But time passed slowly. Apart from sweating, Helian Wei actually didn't have any other signs. This made Elder Wu unable to sit still. He whispered a few words to the eminent monks. Yuan Ming watched from the side and laughed evilly. Woman, you're really smart to have thought of such a plan. I bet that old man would never have dreamt of how you could sit there so calmly. There are many things that he wouldn't have thought of. Helian Vivian's voice was lazy. Initially, I wanted to bribe those eminent monks. However, after thinking about it carefully, it's too dangerous. There are many of the elders' confidants among them. If I really took the silver, it would become evidence that they would not let me go. Beligaju did not arrange it this way because of this. Moreover, Yuan Xiaobai said that Xiao Qi is more powerful than the fire Qilin. If he's by my side, he'll definitely be able to withstand the eminent monk's Buddhist chanting. Since he can withstand it, of course I'll use him. It seems that Xiao Qi is much more low-key than the fire Qilin. Xiaobai's cold voice continued Helian Vivian's words. If His Highness Xiao Qi is really him, then he's not low-key at all. You've been talking about him for so long, I don't even know which one it is. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. In the end, which beast do you think Xiao Qi is? The little one's ears perked up. When he heard Helian Vivian mention his name, he frowned in confusion. Then, as if he had figured something out, he turned his handsome face to the side and said domineeringly, "Third sister-in-law, do you want to eat bin buns?" Helian Vivian. Indeed, Xiao Qi could relate anything to food. Third sister-in-law, don't be shy. If you want to eat, just tell me. I've brought a lot of bean buns, the little one said as he patted his small chest. The corner of Helian Wei's mouth twitched. He must have brought all the bean paste buns in the imperial kitchen here. How could he hide such a small body? Third sister-in-law doesn't want to eat. You eat. Helian Vivian smiled and rubbed the little one's head. She felt the prickling sensation in her palm. Xiao Qi, isn't it time for you to shave your hair? The little one stopped eating his bean buns and stared at her with his round eyes. No. How can you not shave your hair? Won't the dean scold you? Helian Vivian did not forget how strict the dean was with him. The little one shook his head. Third elder brother took me back, so I don't have to follow the dean anymore. Actually, I know that after I leave, those senior uncles who fought with me in the White Academy will miss me. Helian Vivian. Then you're really thinking too much. It would be strange if they didn't welcome you. The more the adult and child chatted happily, the uglier Elder Wu's expression became. How could this be? It shouldn't be like this. At this time, shouldn't Helian Wei be unable to sit still and want to scratch her own face? Why did she look perfectly fine? No. Something must have gone wrong somewhere. Could it be that the eminent monks were chanting the wrong scripture? Impossible, he had checked every single one of them. Moreover, the eminent monks who entered the palace this time were the elder compound's trusted subordinates, so there should not be any mistakes. But why was there no change in Hellion Vivian at all? Faintly, Elder Wu seemed to have a bad feeling in his heart. Chapter 547. How long has it been? Elder Wu was obviously anxious. He turned around and asked the little eunuch beside him. Even his forehead was covered in a thin layer of sweat. Reporting to Elder, it's almost an hour. Once the hour was up, the eminent monks would stop chanting. If nothing happened to Hellion Vivian by then no way, he would never allow that to happen. At this moment, the little eunuch reminded Elder Wu, Elder, it seems like it's time. Elder Wu turned around abruptly and glared at him fiercely. I know very well whether it's time or not. The little eunuch did not understand why Elder Wu was so angry. He was so scared that he quickly shut his mouth. Elder Wu stared at Hellion Vivian's back. That was impossible. Something must have gone wrong. I'm fine. I seem to have disappointed you, Elder Wu. Hellion Vivian smiled at him gently. The curve of her lips was like a slap to Elder Wu's face. He clenched his fists tightly, gritted his teeth and ordered again, chant it again. The eminent monks naturally listened to him, but there were inevitable pauses in the middle. The pauses would make his voice sound especially loud, so everyone looked in his direction. Hellion Vivian looked up and smiled. Elder Wu, it's time. The eminent monks should be done exorcising the bad luck. Elder Wu, are you asking the eminent monks to chant again and again because you want to pray for blessings or because you don't like me and want to accuse me? Princess Consort is right. Nangong Lai slowly walked in from the outside. Elder Wu, what you've done is really suspicious of your purpose. You didn't even tell us about the exorcism in the imperial palace. Instead, you troubled the eminent monks outside the palace. Elder Wu, what you've done is against the rules. As he spoke, he raised his eyebrows and glanced at Beligaju. What he meant was, see, I came in time according to your order. Beligaju's expression did not change in the slightest. His side profile was indifferent, and his eyes were extremely cold. He also took a glance at Nangong Lai. However, his glance was much more black-bellied than Nangong Lai's. If one were to insist on using words to express what they were thinking, there were only 6 words. Play him to death for this lord. Nangong Lai looked into his eyes and could not help but gulp. He wondered how Elder Wu had offended Arju. He had actually given the death order so straightforwardly. Elder Wu was not aware of his situation yet, but he knew that inviting an eminent monk into the palace would offend the hall of worship. However, if Hellion Vivian could reveal her true form under the mantra, it would not matter what method was used. But he never expected that Hellion Vivian would be completely fine. Your Majesty. Nangong Lai was still acting like a noble young master. If your Majesty thinks that the hall of worship cannot protect the peace in the palace, you can drive the Nangong family out of the capital at any time. As long as your Majesty says so, I will do it. You don't have to invite some eminent monks and embarrass the hall of worship. The clan of worship was not a small matter in the entire divine land. Hearing Nangong Lai's words, the emperor no longer kept silent. His words were full of persuasion. Ah Lai, you think too much. I see that the hall of worship has been working day and night for the case. I don't want you to work too hard, so I agreed to Elder Wu's proposal. Besides, Elder Wu doesn't have any other thoughts. He is just worried that the palace will not be peaceful, so he wants to share my burden. If so, what did Elder Wu find out? Nangong Lai stood there, full of evil charm. Elder Wu did not speak. Hellion Vivian stood up and brushed the thin layer of dust off her body. Elder Wu found out nothing, but he refused to let me go. He kept saying that I was the one who possessed the body. He even had the eminent monks recite the soul-summoning mantra again and again. Soul-summoning mantra? Nangong Lai frowned. He turned his head and smiled evilly at Elder Wu. Elder Wu, I don't know much. Don't lie to me. I've been a priest for so long, but this is the first time I've heard that the soul-summoning mantra is used to pray for blessings. Are you trying to pacify your resentment, or do you want to make the palace more restless? Elder Wu is really bold to lie to His Majesty so blatantly. Aren't you afraid of being beheaded? Elder Wu was calm and experienced after all. He would not be flustered by Nangong Li's series of questions. He turned his head and said to the Emperor, Your Majesty, I've already reported to Your Majesty that I asked the eminent monks to recite the soul-summoning mantra. How can it be considered as lying to Your Majesty? Your Majesty, please uphold justice for me. Indeed, Elder Wu has already explained this matter. The Emperor had always been in a bad mood. He said perfunctorily, Ah Lai, you're all my officials. You're all doing this for the peace of the palace. I know all of this. Since Elder Wu has investigated and found nothing wrong, that's naturally the best. There's no need to say anything else. Nangong Li narrowed his fox-like eyes. There was a hint of mockery in his drooping mouth, but he did not respond. However, Bailey Jiaoju opened his mouth slowly. For the peace of the palace, we need sufficient evidence. Elder Wu has slandered my princess consort. Shouldn't you admit your mistake? When he spoke, his posture was no different from usual. He was still tall and graceful, with an unchanging authority and nobility. However, Elder Wu could feel a sense of superiority and absolute disdain from him. This was what he hated the most. The Emperor looked at Elder Wu, then looked at Belegaju's cold face and Nangong Li's dissatisfaction. He knew that if he did not show some attitude, he would never forget about this. The imperial palace calculated the gains and losses in his mind. He changed his mind and pushed Elder Wu out. Since things have escalated to this point, Elder Wu, you should apologize to the juniors. It's not a big deal. Your Majesty. In just a moment, Elder Wu's face changed from being proud to pale. He was the third-generation elder. Everyone present knew about his status and prestige in the War Dragon Empire. Now, His Majesty actually wanted him to bend his waist and apologize to Helian Wei, a junior, in front of so many people. This was even more unbearable than killing him. What's wrong? Helian Vivian sat on her seat with her legs slightly crossed. She leaned back leisurely. Elder Wu wants to go against the imperial decree? Elder Wu, the Emperor urged again. His voice was obviously lower than the last time. Elder Wu snatched the cup of tea from the little eunuch's hand and took a deep breath. As he walked toward Helian Wei, the muscles on his face were trembling in anger. At this very moment, all he wanted to do was to find a hole and hide in it. Chapter 548. I've misunderstood Princess Consort, it's all my fault. Elder Wu clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. It was the first time in his life that he felt so embarrassed. Helian Vivian glanced at him lightly. It's not a misunderstanding, it's a false accusation. It's better for Elder Wu not to accuse people without any evidence in the future. Elder Wu clenched his teeth and said, Yes. Helian Wei smiled faintly as she took the teacup from his hand. Instead of drinking, she passed it to the little eunuch at the side. Her thin lips carried a smile as she said, I'll leave it to you. Elder Wu's tea is not that easy to drink. Even though Elder Wu was a person who could keep his composure, his expression turned ugly when he saw Helian Vivian's action. She actually gave the tea that he offered to a eunuch. She was obviously humiliating him. Elder Wu took a deep breath. His hands were hanging by his side so tight that the veins on the back of his hands could be seen. I'll let her be arrogant for now. When the soldiers enter the palace later, Belegaju will be in a dilemma and be accused of treason. I'd like to see how this Helian Vivian and the third prince can still be so smug. When Elder Wu thought of this, his shrewd eyes were filled with viciousness. He straightened his back and wanted to retreat. Hold on. Bailey Jiaoju's long and narrow eyes looked up and strolled to Wei's side. His tone was neither fast nor slow. Old Wu, when you apologize to the princess consort, you don't need me to teach you how to salute, right? Once again, Elder Wu's expression changed. However, compared to the previous time, this time, it was much more genuine and gloomy. Third brother. The Emperor, who realized what Belegaju wanted to say, reprimanded him in a low voice. Bailey Jiaoju did not even look at him. He lowered his eyes and looked down at Elder Wu. His voice was cold and he only said 2 words, "Kneel." "Third brother." The emperor stood up abruptly. Only then did Bailey Jiaoju look up at him with his bright eyes. He still had a faint smile on his face as he said, "Since ancient times, the imperial family has always been respected. Father, you have allowed Elder Wu to be so unruly. Where is the dignity of our imperial family? Or does father think that the status of the elder courtyard is higher than the imperial family?" The emperor narrowed his eyes, then turned around and said to Elder Wu, "Elder Wu, third brother is right. You, kneel." "Your Majesty." Elder Wu still wanted to say something. The emperor didn't listen to him. He just waved his hand, and that was what he meant. If there was anyone in this world who understood the emperor was the emperor. That was none other than Bailey Jiaoju. The emperor's greatest taboo was that the elder courtyard's imposing manner overshadowed the imperial family. What he had always wanted to do was to use both kindness and authority. However much love he could give the elder council, he would restrict them as much as he could. Especially in front of the public. Of course, Elder Wu was aware of this. He clearly understood that he could no longer refuse at this point in time. If he refused, it would definitely arouse the emperor's displeasure and suspicion. Then, the next part of the plan could not be carried out. Elder Wu bit the meat in his mouth and looked at Belegaju's face. Slowly, he knelt down. Nangong Lai smiled charmingly at the side. He patted Elder Wu's shoulder and said in a low voice, "Elder Wu, if I were you, I wouldn't provoke the imperial family like this. The elder courtyard has the guts. However, the scene of being slapped in the face is really TSK, it's so ugly." Elder Wu's eyes darkened. The long sleeves under his fingers were still twisted by his grip. Hellion Vivian was impressed by His Highness's methods. He really wanted to play people to death. Looking at Elder Wu's face, he was so angry that he had probably never knelt before anyone in his life. Following His Highness was like having meat to eat. Seeing that Hellion Vivian was satisfied, Belegaju said coldly, "Elder Wu, remember this. If you do it again, it won't be as simple as kneeling." "Yes." Elder Wu said the word yes unwillingly. He stood up with a flick of his sleeve and walked back to his seat in big strides. His chest was still rising and falling. Elder Zhon stood beside him and said in a low voice, "Elder Wu, I think we should postpone our plan. The imperial family is really difficult to deal with. I'm afraid something will go wrong. No matter how difficult it is to deal with him, he can't escape today." Elder Wu calmed his breath and a cold light flashed in his eyes. As soon as the sound of soldiers and horses is heard, the first person His Majesty will question will be the third prince. Just you wait, this will definitely be a good show. Elder Zhon also wanted to see Belegaju fail miserably. Thinking about it carefully, their plan was foolproof and there was no loophole at all. However, he saw that Hellion Vivian did not show her true colors even though it was clearly a foregone conclusion. Instead, it was Elder Wu who lost face. He could not help but mutter in his heart. However, as Elder Wu said, as soon as the sound of soldiers and horses is heard, no matter whether the third prince sends out his troops or not, he will not end well in the end. He will be treated as a prince guilty of treason by His Majesty and completely lose the right to be the crown prince. As long as he could defeat the third prince, what was a little risk? "All right, sit down." After His Majesty finished speaking, he coughed heavily twice. When Eunuch Gao saw this, he immediately handed over a blood-red pill. His Majesty seemed to be very anxious, as if he needed that pill very much. He did not even hide it in front of everyone and directly swallowed it without even drinking water. After that, it was finally smooth. He took a deep breath and said, "Ah Lai, you and Elder Wu are both virtuous ministers of the War Dragon dynasty. In the future, you must be considerate of each other." As he said that, he turned to Elder Wu and asked, "Elder Wu, what's next?" Elder Wu stood up and said in a respectful manner, "Your Majesty, we just need to wait for the eminent monks to finish their rounds of chanting Buddhism and come back. Then, everyone, let's wait in this palace." After His Majesty finished speaking, he glanced at Eunuch Gao. Eunuch Gao raised his voice and shouted, "Serve tea and pastries." In just a moment, the palace maids carrying food plates walked in. Their long dresses reached their ankles and their steps were light, not daring to make a single mistake. As the chanting of Buddhist scriptures gradually faded away, His Majesty raised the teacup in his hand. The people below responded one after another, drinking tea and eating pastries. Little Seven sat on Hellion Vivian's left side and followed her closely. He was munching on the bean paste bun he brought with him with a very cold expression. "Why aren't you eating?" Hellion Vivian found it strange. This was not the little one's style. Chapter 549. Lil Seven reached out and scratched his little ears. "It's too noisy outside. If I eat now, I'll have to stand up and fight later. I'll eat after the fight is over." As he spoke, he tilted his head and thought for a while. Then, he said seriously, "Why don't you wrap them up for me? Otherwise, the snacks will fall off when the fight starts later." As soon as the little one finished his words, there was a commotion outside. The Emperor was already angry because of Belegaju's attitude just now. Now, his thick brows furrowed even tighter. "Go and see what's going on outside. Why is it so noisy?" "Yes." Eunuch Gao left after receiving the order. The two elders sitting in the hall moved their teacups away. They looked at each other and nodded. Hellion Vivian smiled when she saw their actions. Then, she stood up and found an excuse to leave the hall with Lil Seven. Before this, there were already concubines who could leave and the Emperor did not stop them. Therefore, Hellion Vivian did not attract much attention when she left. Elder Wu saw it. However, after the failure of the soul enchanting spell, it did not matter if Hellion Vivian was here or not. It was good that she left. It would save her the trouble of saying anything to help Belegaju. As long as the third prince was in the hall, everything could be done. Elder Wu gulped down a mouthful of tea ferociously. Just wait and see, he would definitely skin Bailey Jiaju alive. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Bad news. Bad news." Eunuch Gao, who had just walked out of the room, ran back in, panting heavily. The Emperor stared at him unhappily. "What's the matter? Why are you in such a panic?" Reporting to Your Majesty. A group of rebels has come in from outside. They have started fighting with the Imperial Guards." Eunuch Gao's forehead was covered with a layer of sweat after he finished speaking. "They will break into Chaoyang Hall soon." As soon as Eunuch Gao finished speaking, it was as if the pause button was pressed. In an instant, the palace fell into a deathly silence. The sound of drinking tea and eating snacks completely disappeared. The concubines all froze. Even the Emperor was shocked. He was surprised as if he had misheard. "What did you say?" "There's a group of traitors outside the palace." "Shut up." Before Eunuch Gao could finish his words, the Emperor interrupted him again. His voice was cold, and his pitch rose sharply. "That's impossible. How can my War Dragon Empire's imperial palace be so easy to attack?" But this was the news he had heard. When Elder Wu saw that everything was going according to his plan, he took a step forward and said, "Your Majesty, since Eunuch Gao said that it's true, it must be true. The noise outside is indeed the sound of weapons killing the enemy." "Yes, yes, yes." Eunuch Gao didn't know what to do. He could only nod his head continuously. The Emperor narrowed his eyes dangerously. With a wave of his hand, the teacup on the table fell to the ground. "Who is it? Who had the guts to do that?" Elder Wu lowered his eyes. "I don't know who it is, but just like what Your Majesty said, the Imperial Palace is so heavily guarded. There are countless palaces, not to mention that the War Dragon Empire's strongest Imperial army is guarding the front of Chaoyang Hall. It's impossible to rely on the traitors outside. Under normal circumstances, they would be killed before they could even enter the Imperial Palace. Since they were able to attack, it can only mean one thing. There's someone in Chaoyang Hall who is cooperating with them from the inside." "Elder Wu, you mean?" The Emperor stood up. His lips were deathly pale, and his entire face looked somewhat gloomy. His eyes swept across the people in the hall one by one, and finally fell on Bailey Jiaju. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Someone wants to rebel?" Elder Wu answered respectfully, "I'm just guessing. After all, it's a big crime to say such a thing." I don't dare to say anything. However, there's one thing that I really want to know. At this point, Elder Wu paused and did not continue. Instead, he glanced at Beligaju. Bailey Jiaoju's two slender legs were half-crossed. His expression was still noble and indifferent. His handsome side profile seemed to have been drawn by a brush. It was as if no matter what happened outside, he had no impression of him at all. The Emperor was looking at him as well. He retracted his gaze and said to Elder Wu, "What's the matter?" "Elder Wu, just say it. I've heard someone mention it before. They said that they saw someone rushing to make something in the royal palace. The cloth was golden in color and embroidered with dragon claws." Elder Wu raised his head and looked at the Emperor as he spoke. "Your Majesty, according to the ancestral rules, only Your Majesty can wear golden silk. I'm curious. Why would the royal palace rush to make a robe of this color? A golden cloth with dragon claws embroidered on it." It was obvious that they were trying to rebel. The more the Emperor listened, the colder his face became. His eyes looked toward Bailey Jiaoju. The thick black liquid in his eyes made people feel very uncomfortable. "Third brother, how do you explain this matter?" "It's all nonsense," Beligaju replied calmly. His slender fingers twirled the teacup. He was neither anxious nor impatient, but he gave off a cold vibe. Before the Emperor could speak, Elder Wu cut in and began to retreat in order to advance. Perhaps someone saw wrongly, but the people below seemed to be telling the truth. It's inevitable that this old official would want to clarify things and find out the truth. "If your Third Highness doesn't mind, this old subject suggests that we send someone to search your Third Highness chambers. This way, not only will we be able to suppress the vile rumors, we can also prove your Third Highness' innocence. Elder Wu, do you know how serious of a crime it is to randomly search a prince's bedroom?" Bailey Jiaoju asked in a cold voice. Elder Wu was thick-skinned as he shouted, "I'm just thinking about your Highness' innocence. Since there's nothing in your Highness's palace, we should investigate further. We'll do as Elder Wu says." The Emperor glanced at Beligaju. His voice was so deep that it was almost emotionless. "Someone, search the Jochong Palace to see if there's the golden robe that Elder Wu mentioned." "Yes." The crowd retreated after receiving the order. The sounds of fighting outside the palace were still ringing. The Emperor's eyes could not be any darker. Elder Wu was very pleased with himself. He thought that no matter how smart Beligaju was, he would never expect that he had planned everything beforehand. A day ago, he had already gotten someone to hide a set of dragon robes in the Jochong Palace. Although it was placed in an inconspicuous position, it could be found easily with a flip of the wrist. He wanted to see what Beligaju's face would look like when the dragon robe was brought over. Chapter 550. The atmosphere in Chaoyang Hall was getting heavier and heavier. The sounds of fighting outside were getting closer and closer. If this had happened in the past, the Emperor would have sent the third prince out to prepare for the battle. But today, everyone could feel the Emperor's deep distrust towards the third prince. All the ministers and concubines dared not speak. They only lowered their eyes, each with different thoughts in their minds. To be honest, with the third prince's current power, he could have rebelled long ago if he really wanted to. Why would he leave a clue behind and let Elder Wu get a hold of it? Presumably, the Emperor also understood this point. It was precisely because the Emperor also understood this that he acted like this. No emperor would want to keep a prince who was more popular than him. Therefore, even though Elder Wu was the one who suggested this, the one who really wanted to seize this opportunity and not let the third prince off the hook might be the emperor himself. Elder Wu. The people who went to search returned quickly with joy on their faces. It was obvious that they had gained a lot from this trip to Jochong Hall. Elder Wu glanced at Beligaju with a smug look on his face. "How was it? Did you find something?" That person nodded. "We entered the royal study. At first, the shadow guards tried to stop us. We thought they were acting suspiciously, so we barged in. As expected, there was a black package in the secret chamber of the study. They hid it very carefully. Elder Wu had indeed instructed his spies to wrap the fake dragon robe in a black bag so that the other party would not notice it. Now that the black bag was found, It meant that Bailey Jiaoju would not be able to make a comeback this time even if he were to die. Your Highness, shouldn't you explain what's in the black package? Elder Wu's face was full of smiles. Your Highness, please don't tell me that you don't know either. Beligaju glanced at him indifferently. The corner of his mouth seemed to be curled into a mocking smile. Nangong Lai was smart. Although he did not know what exactly was going on, he could tell at a glance that Elder Wu had done something shady. When he looked at Bailey Jiaoju, he could not help but reveal a worried look. He did not believe that Ju would hide the dragon robe. Because he knew better than anyone else that with Ju's power, if he couldn't wait and wanted to sit on the throne, he could use any method. There was no need to hide a dragon robe. But this kind of thing couldn't help but be planned in advance. Once the crime of keeping the dragon robe was confirmed, then Nangong Lai's brows wrinkled. For the first time, a ruthless coldness appeared on his unrestrained and bewitching handsome face. The emperor sat on the dragon throne and coughed heavily. His eyes swept over the packages that the imperial bodyguards were carrying. His chest rolled. Good. Third brother, you really are my good son. Bang. The sound of another teacup shattering could be heard. However, the teacup brushed past Beligaju's hair and hit the wooden beam behind him. Beligaju's elegant and indifferent handsome face still carried a smile that wasn't a smile. He didn't move, and even his posture was the same as before. Only that pair of long and narrow eyes emitted a sense of oppression. It made the emperor feel frightened. The emperor seemed to have realized that his action was a little overboard. He took a deep breath and stood up from the dragon throne with his whole body trembling. This world will be yours sooner or later, why are you so anxious? Hiding the dragon robe. I usually spoil you the most, but what about you? Was it also your idea to send in those traitors outside? What are you planning to do? Are you trying to force me to abdicate? Before Beligaju could speak, Elder Wu immediately knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, as a member of the House of Elders, this old official has always been responsible for protecting the country and its people. Since some things have already floated to the surface, this old official has no choice but to say it. Everyone present knows the third prince's attainments in martial arts. All these years, the imperial palace's security has basically been overseen by him. Now that the rebel army is outside and is about to attack, the third prince's shadow guards have not made the slightest movement. The royal family is still standing in Chaoyang Hall, and they don't have any intention to help. From the beginning, I've said that the palace is easy to defend and hard to attack. There are more than 10 palaces. If you want to attack, you must have a detailed and comprehensive plan, otherwise, you won't succeed. But today, the rebels were able to sneak through the layers of walls and approach Chaoyang Hall. That can only mean one thing: someone in the palace is working with them from the inside. Now, it seems that the person who is commanding the rebels is undoubtedly the royal family who is most familiar with the inner court of the palace. A bunch of nonsense. Governor Chen couldn't hold it in anymore and stood up. Elder Wu, how can you insist that the royal family is a rebel just based on your own guess? You don't have any evidence and you're just making such a big accusation. If the retired emperor knows about this, do you think he'll let you off so easily? Elder Wu smiled and lifted his chin slightly. Lord Chen, don't use the retired emperor to pressure me. The retired emperor's health isn't good. He just went to the hidden spirit temple, and I'm afraid he won't be back anytime soon. Even if the retired emperor comes back and sees the royal family's treacherous behavior, I don't think he'll help him. He'll only deal with it more decisively. Elder Wu is right. Elder Zhon also stood up, his face full of righteousness. The royal family's crime this time is no small matter. At this stage, Lord Chen is still trying to defend it. Could it be that you're involved in this too? Governor Chen turned around abruptly, his face full of anger. You, all of you. You're slandering me. As he spoke, he cupped his hands. Your Majesty, you must investigate this thoroughly. Your Majesty, please investigate this thoroughly. With Governor Chen as the leader, many ministers knelt on the ground. They wanted the emperor to consider this carefully and not wrongly accuse anyone. However, they didn't know that the more people begged for mercy, the more the emperor wanted to punish Beligaju. He narrowed his eyes slightly as he tightened his grip on the pill in his hand. Since when did the situation in the imperial court come to this stage? Half of the ministers were begging for mercy for the third prince. Did they know who was the real person sitting on the dragon throne? Nangong Lai saw the situation and knew that it was not good. As a prodigy priest, he knew the emperor well, if not 100%, he knew at least 70%. The emperor had always been afraid of Arju, whether intentionally or not. He was worried that Arju's limelight would overshadow his. That was why when that happened, he didn't overly suppress the elder compound. It wasn't a good thing for a prince to show his kingly image too early. Arju was too qualified to be the emperor, that was why he was neglected since he was young. Now that so many people were kneeling and begging for mercy for Arju, according to the emperor's character, not only would he not spare Arju, he might even punish him more severely. Chapter 551. At the thought of this, Nangong Lai turned around abruptly and glared at Beligaju, who was standing in the middle of the hall. He did not believe that Arju did not understand this. "Third brother, these ministers have asked me to spare you." The emperor chuckled softly. "The crime of treason is such a serious crime. Tell me, do you think I can spare you?" Eunuch Gao was scared out of his wits at this moment. He was trembling as he waited beside the emperor. The emperor had no way to vent his anger on Beligaju. He kicked Eunuch Gao aside and scolded him indirectly. "You really can't be tamed no matter how hard you try. Your Majesty." Elder Wu's eyes flickered slightly. "Why don't you just bear with it this time, considering that the royal prince is still young?" "He's still young?" The emperor was even angrier. "He has the ability to keep the dragon robe for himself." Elder Wu knew that his plan had worked, so he did not say anything else. He just took a step back and could not hide the smile on his face. At this moment, the more people plead for mercy for the third prince, the more horrible his death would be. Everything was going according to his plan. Coupled with the sound of soldiers and horses outside, the emperor's real thoughts could no longer be suppressed. Presumably, even now, the third prince still doesn't understand how he died. That was why one should not always put oneself on a pedestal. Who knew when one would fall from the pedestal, and in such an ugly way? Elder Wu shook his head and pretended to sigh. However, what he did not expect was, just at this time, Bailey Jiaoju opened his mouth unhurriedly. His voice was cold and indifferent, carrying a unique ridicule. "You've all finished speaking. Isn't it my turn to speak now?" Although he used this sentence as a question, his tone was declarative. He stood tall and straight with a smile on his face. It was as if he could give advice to a chess game while talking. "Elder Wu, is it because I have been too merciful to the people of the Elder Compound? Is that why you have the guts to frame me?" Elder Wu looked up with a pained expression. "Royal family, things have come to this. It's fine if you don't want to admit it, but why do you have to slander me like this? As one of the 4 Grand Elders, I have the responsibility to protect the country. Perhaps the royal family feels that this old official has exposed you in front of the palace, so this old official is guilty beyond redemption. But that is where this old official's conscience lies. If this old official discovers that someone has the intention to rebel and this old official does not report it to the emperor, then this old official has failed in his duty. Your Highness. I also don't believe that His Highness is such a person, but now that there are both witnesses and material evidence, who can understand the feeling in this old official's heart? It seems that I am still too gentle." Beligaju absent-mindedly turned the silver ring on his finger. "Acting in front of me? Heh." His laughter was very seductive, it could even be said that it was deep and magnetic. However, the coldness that seeped out from it was enough to make everyone shudder. Elder Wu braced himself and turned his face away. He did not speak to Beligaju anymore. Instead, he spoke to the emperor. "Your Majesty, you know very well what kind of thoughts this old official has. The people of the Elder Compound have worked hard for so many years, wholeheartedly for your Majesty, but we are always misunderstood. Now that your Highness thinks of this old official like this, I am really worried that if your Majesty does not punish the royal family this time, he will punish me and my family." "Third brother." The emperor's face was completely gloomy. "This is the Chaoyang Palace, how dare you be so presumptuous? Do you even respect me, the emperor, as your father?" Bailey Jiao unhurriedly brushed his robe. He was as indifferent and elegant as usual, but his tone was mixed with a kind of indescribable mockery. Father, aren't you a little too anxious to condemn me so quickly? Hearing this, the emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously. Elder Wu immediately continued the topic. The royal family, the dragon robe has been found, what else do you have to say? Dragon robe? Beligaju looked down at the black package on the ground. Just based on this? Elder Wu steadied his tone. It seems that your highness will not give up until the royal family sees it for themselves. Guards, open this black package. Yes. One of the two bodyguards answered and bowed. Elder Wu raised his chin proudly, waiting to see how Beligaju would be rendered speechless. However, he heard a commotion. What is that? It looks like beef jerky. There should be candied dates too, right? Beef jerky? Candied dates? Elder Wu seemed to have realized something. He lowered his head and looked at the snacks scattered all over the ground after the black package was opened. His dark brown eyes shook back and forth. This is impossible. How could this be? This is impossible. He was the one who put the item away. How could a dragon robe turn into a pile of beef jerky out of nowhere? This black package was obviously the one that he ordered someone to hide in the Jochong Hall. Could it be? Elder Wu suddenly raised his eyes and looked at Beligaju's face with a pale face. It's him. It must be him. The person who hid the item was found out by him. He took advantage of the situation and changed the dragon robe inside. But why didn't he say that it was filled with snacks from the start? Moreover, he did not punish the person who hid the dragon robe. He even left that person to report to him. Elder Wu did not know why, but he began to feel extremely uneasy. The pride he had just now almost collapsed in an instant. He looked at the man standing in front of him. He had been like this from beginning to end. When he looked at him, it was as if he was looking at a clown who couldn't stand on the stage. This made Elder Wu feel an unprecedented chill. He could not help but take a few steps back. The expression on his face was numb. The emperor was stunned as well. He then frowned. Beligaju smiled faintly and picked up a piece of beef jerky. His long fingers that were wearing a black glove crushed it little by little, but his posture was elegant and handsome. What's wrong? Elder Wu seems to be very disappointed. Coincidentally, I wanted to ask Elder Wu about the snacks that I was planning to give to Little Seven. Elder Wu did not even open it to take a look. How could you be so sure that it contained the dragon robe? Elder Wu could not hold his ground with such a question. There was an uproar in the palace. Everyone looked at Elder Wu with a deep sense of inquiry. Elder Wu gritted his teeth and tried to keep his mind clear. There was still a chance. He had not completely failed. As long as the commotion outside the palace was still there, he had not lost. Since he had chosen not to send the army, even if the dragon robe was not a success, Beligaju would not be able to escape from this rebellion. Let's see what I have to say next. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.